Her brother's hand closed around her wrist like a trap snapping shut. Not a gentle grip. Not the kind a brother uses to pull you back from traffic or steady you on ice. This was ownership. This was a man dragging livestock toward a truck, his fingers digging into the same bruised flesh that had yellowed and repurpled so many times, the skin had almost forgotten what unmarked felt like. "Move," he said. Not to her, to the space in front of her, like she was already gone. The rain made everything worse. It always did in this part of the city. The industrial district where the streetlights flickered and nobody called the police because the police had stopped coming years ago. The alley behind the diner smelled like wet cardboard and fryer grease, and something else underneath it all, something that had no name but that Amani Brooks had been breathing her whole life. It smelled like no way out. She didn't scream. She had learned not to. If this story made you stop scrolling, stay, because what happened next in that alley is something most people will never believe. Like this video if it moves you. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. You will not want to miss what comes next. The diner was called Marta's, though no one named Marta had worked there in 11 years. It sat on the corner of Halsted and Reyes, wedged between a shuttered auto parts warehouse and a check cashing place with bulletproof glass so scratched you could barely read the hours. The sign out front had lost 2 letters. Now it just said MRAs, and nobody had bothered to fix it because nobody who ate there cared what the sign said. They came because the coffee was hot, and the booths were private, and the cook, a heavy-set Dominican man named Felix, didn't ask questions. Amani had worked the Tuesday night shift for 2 years. She was 23 years old, though most people guessed younger. Something about the way she moved, shoulders drawn in, eyes that tracked the room the way a person learns to when they've spent too long around unpredictable things. She wasn't small, but she made herself small. It had become habit. Habit had become survival. She refilled the napkin dispensers at 7:15. She mopped a spill near the register at 7:40. She smiled at a regular named Doug, who always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, no food, always left a $1.50 tip regardless of how long he stayed. And she said, "Cold out there tonight, huh?" And Doug said, "Getting colder." And that was the whole of their relationship, and somehow it was one of the warmer ones in her life. At 8:03, the man in booth 6 ordered pie. Amani didn't notice him when he came in. That wasn't unusual. She was restocking sugar packets, and the bell above the door rang a dozen times a night, and she had trained herself not to look up every time because looking up cost energy, and energy was something she rationed carefully. But when she carried the coffee pot to booth 6 on her rotation, she noticed him because something in the air shifted slightly, the way it does when barometric pressure changes before a storm. Subtle enough that most people miss it, but you feel it in your back teeth. He was Korean, somewhere in his early 40s, wearing a charcoal coat that was too expensive for this part of the city. Not flashy. The opposite of flashy, actually. The coat was the kind that looked plain until you noticed the way it held its shape and the way it didn't wrinkle despite the rain outside. His hair was black going silver at the temples. His hands were folded on the table. He was sitting with his back to the wall, facing the door, and he had the stillness of someone who had decided long ago that stillness was safer than movement. He hadn't looked at a menu. "Coffee?" Amani asked. "Yes." Then, after a pause, "And whatever pie you have left." "Cherry or peach? The cherry's better." "Cherry, then." She poured without spilling, which took concentration because her right hand had been aching all day. The kind of deep ache that lived in the bone, not the muscle. And she carried it back to the counter and thought nothing more of him. 2 booths down, the man in the green jacket had been nursing his 3rd beer since 7:30. His name, she would learn later, was not something worth remembering. What mattered was that he was drunk in the specific way that made some men mean, not sloppy mean, not falling over mean, but deliberate mean, the kind that picks a target and works toward it with grim focus. He had been watching Amani since she walked past him the first time. She had felt it. She always felt it. She had cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, filed under manageable, ignore for now, and moved on. At 8:22, he called her over. She went, order pad out, face neutral. This was the job. The job was the job. Get me another, he said, sliding his empty bottle toward the edge of the table. We're not licensed for beer, she said. This was true. Felix kept a few bottles in the back cooler for certain regulars and looked the other way, but that was a courtesy, not a service, and it had its limits. I can get you coffee. I didn't ask for coffee. I know, I can get you coffee, or I can get you pie. She kept her voice even, practiced. Those are your options. He looked at her then, really looked, the way that made her skin feel slightly wrong. You got a mouth on you. I'm just telling you what we have. What else you got? He smiled at this, pleased with himself in a way that didn't reach his eyes. The table nearest the door had gone quiet. Doug, in his usual spot, had set down his cup. Even Felix, through the pass-through window, had stopped moving. Amani said nothing. She took a breath. She put the order pad back in her apron pocket and prepared to walk away, which was the right move. The move that kept things manageable. The move that did not escalate. The man's hand shot out and caught her wrist, not the bruised one. She would be grateful for that later, in the way you're grateful for small mercies when the large ones aren't available. But his grip was hard, and his fingers wrapped all the way around, and she felt the pull, a deliberate testing pull, like he was gauging whether she'd resist. She didn't. She had learned not to. Sit down a minute, he said. Let go of me. Her voice was very quiet. Just sit down. Have a conversation. She said, let go. The voice came from booth 6. It was not loud. It was not raised. It was the kind of voice that had no need to raise itself because it existed at a frequency that bypassed the ears and went directly to something more primitive, the part of the brain that has been calculating threat since before language existed. Calm, measured, and carrying inside it the absolute certainty of someone who has never once in his adult life needed to repeat himself. The man in the green jacket looked over. Kong Min-jae had not stood up. He had not moved, in fact, except that his folded hands had come apart, and one of them now rested flat on the table, and he was looking at the man in the green jacket with an expression that was not angry, not threatening in any theatrical sense, but simply patient in a way that suggested he had already calculated every possible outcome of the next 30 seconds and had found all of them equally acceptable. Let go of her, Min-jae said. The man in the green jacket let go. He didn't decide to let go. His hand just opened. It was muscle memory, the body reacting to something the mind was still catching up to, and afterward he sat back in the booth and looked at his own hand like it had done something without his permission. And then he looked at the man in the charcoal coat, and something moved through his face. Not quite fear, not at first, but the precursor to fear. The moment of recalibration when the body realizes the math has changed. He picked up his empty bottle. He set some bills on the table. He left. The diner exhaled. Amani stood very still in the space between the booths. She was looking at the door the man had walked through. She was not crying. She hadn't cried in public in years, had trained it out of herself with the same grim efficiency she'd used to train herself not to scream, but her jaw was tight and her eyes were too bright, and she was breathing through her nose in a way that anyone paying attention would recognize. Min-jae was paying attention. You okay? He asked. Not in the way people ask when they want you to say yes so they can stop worrying. He asked the way a person asks when they genuinely don't know the answer and want the real one. Fine. The word came out flat and practiced. Thank you. She turned to go back to the counter. Your pie, he said. She had forgotten to bring it. She almost laughed. A short, sharp, involuntary thing that she cut off before it fully formed. She went behind the counter, cut a slice of cherry from the case, plated it without ceremony, carried it back, set it in front of him, turned to leave. The coffee pot slipped. She was never sure afterward what exactly caused it. The ache in her right hand, the residual shake she was still managing from the encounter, simple tired body failure on a shift that had been going for 6 hours. Whatever the cause, the pot tilted, the handle slipped through her fingers, and she caught it. Barely, mostly. But the lid came loose, and a splash of coffee hit the edge of the table and ran down and caught her forearm as she pulled it back. Hot. Not scalding, not diner liability hot, but enough to make her hiss through her teeth and jerk her sleeve back instinctively. The sleeve came up. Min-jae saw the bruises. There were 3 of them, thumb-shaped, in a row just above the wrist, dark purple deepening to black at the center. Old enough to have gone past the fresh swollen stage into something worse. That flattened, resolved-looking bruising that meant the blood had long since settled. Around the edges, faded yellow from something older beneath. He looked at them for 2 seconds. Then he looked at her face. She yanked the sleeve back down. "I'm sorry about the coffee. I'll bring you more." "Sit down." "I really don't." "Please." And then something shifted in his voice, just slightly, just enough. The command became a request. "Sit down for a minute. I'm not going to hurt you. I know that's not worth much coming from a stranger, but I'm telling you anyway." She sat down. She didn't know why. Later she would tell herself it was because she was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that runs past physical and into something structural. And he had said please, and please was not a word that showed up much in her life anymore. "Who did that?" he asked. "I fell." He looked at her. The patience in his face was immovable. "People don't fall like that," he said. "I've seen a lot of injuries. That's a grip. Someone held you there." She said nothing. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "But you can." She looked at the table. The formica was scratched in a pattern she'd memorized on slow nights. Someone had carved initials into it years ago, JT plus somebody, the second name worn away. She traced the J with her fingertip, breathed. "My father," she said. "And my brother." The words came out like something she'd been holding underwater and had finally stopped being able to keep down. Min-jae didn't react with the wide eyes and the "oh my God" that she'd gotten once, years ago, from a school counselor who hadn't known what to do with the information after she'd received it. He just listened. His face stayed still. His hands stayed flat on the table. And somehow that stillness, that absolute, contained, unflinching stillness, made it possible for her to keep going. "My dad gambled," she said. "Has been gambling since before I can remember. My brother started a couple years ago, slots mostly, but then other things. Sports, numbers, whatever." She paused. "They're not bad people." She said this like she was defending something. They made choices, and the choices stacked up, and now—" She stopped. He waited. "There's a gang," she said. "Down by the docks. They call themselves the Black Serpents. My dad owes them money. A lot of money. And my brother—" She pressed her lips together. "My brother thought he could fix it." "What did he do?" She looked up at him then, really looked. She had been avoiding his eyes since he'd sat her down, not because she was afraid of him, or not only that, but because there was something in the directness of his gaze that was hard to meet, like looking directly at a bright light. Not harsh, just a lot. "He signed a contract," she said. Min-jae's expression didn't change, but something happened in his eyes. A door closed. Or maybe opened. She couldn't tell which. What kind of contract? It wasn't a question. He already knew what kind. But he was giving her the chance to say it, or not say it, whatever she needed. "The gang runs women," she said. Her voice was very flat now. She'd gone into that place she went sometimes, the place that was like being on the other side of a pane of glass from your own life. She could see everything. She just couldn't feel it at the same time, or it would break her. Not trafficking, not like across borders, but here, locally. They have clubs, places, they run girls for the men in this city who want that kind of— She stopped. Started again. "My dad owes them $80,000. My brother figured out a way to make the debt go away. He signed my name to a contract saying I would work for them, starting tonight." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight and temperature. "Tonight," Min-jae said. "The debt was due today. They were already lenient, or that's what my dad called it. Lenient. Giving him 3 extra months. Tonight is the last night. My brother told me this morning. He said—" Her voice cracked. Just once. Just a small fracture. "He said it was the only way. He said I'd be okay. He said they'd treat me well." She exhaled slowly. "He said a lot of things." Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. Then, How long have you known? Since this morning. And you came to work anyway. Where else was I going to go? The question sat between them, genuine and bleak. He picked up his fork and took one measured bite of the cherry pie. Set the fork down. He wasn't eating because he was hungry. She understood that somehow. He was giving himself something to do with his hands while he thought, and he was thinking in that deep, still, interior way that made her wonder what was happening behind his eyes. The contract, he said. Do they have it on paper? My brother said he signed it on paper. He told me because I think he thought I'd... She stopped. I think he thought telling me was enough, like he'd done his part by warning me. And your father, he knows. He's the one who went to them. He's the one who... She caught herself. Yes, he knows. How much does your brother weigh? The question was so out of place that she actually blinked. What? Your brother, how big is he? He's, I don't know, maybe 180. He works construction sometimes. He's... Why are you asking me that? Minjae reached into his coat and set a business card on the table. White. No logo. Just a name, a number, nothing else. When you get off your shift, he said, don't go out the front door. Don't go out the back alone. Come and find me. He slid the card toward her. I'll be outside. She stared at the card. Why would you... She looked up at him. Who are you? He didn't answer that directly. He said, I'm someone who has seen what those men do to women who work for them. I've seen it twice. I don't need to see it a third time. I don't know you. No. You could be worse than them. Yes, he said simply. I could be. You'll have to decide if that's a risk worth taking. He reached into his coat again, laid 2 50s on the table, far too much for coffee and a slice of pie, and stood. At the door he paused. What's your name? He asked, without turning fully around. Amani. A pause. That's a good name, he said, in the tone of someone noting a fact. Then he walked out into the rain. She stood at the empty booth for 30 seconds, holding the card, listening to the rain hit the windows and Felix's radio bleating some old ballad through the pass-through, and she thought about all the reasons not to follow him. She filled a whole mental list. The list was long and logical and completely correct. She thought about her brother's hand around her wrist, the same grip as always, the same force, the same absolute absence of apology in it. She thought about the contract. She thought about tonight. She pocketed the card. At 8:59, with 1 minute left on her shift, Amani Brooks untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter, and said goodnight to Felix, who looked at her for a moment like he was going to say something and then didn't. And then she pushed through the side door. Not the front, not the back, the side, the one that opened onto the narrow service passage between the diner and the check-cashing place. And she walked through the dark toward the only offer of help she'd received in longer than she could reliably remember. Her brother was already there. Not just her brother. 2 men beside him she didn't recognize, wide, quiet, standing in the posture of men who had practiced standing that way. A white van at the mouth of the alley, engine running. Her brother had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at his phone, and he didn't see her come out the side door, not immediately. And for one suspended second, she had the wild thought that she could turn around, go back inside, call someone, do something. Amani. He'd looked up. Her brother's face, in the yellow light from the alley lamp, was not the face of a monster. That was the worst part. It was just her brother. It was just the boy she had grown up with, who had taught her to ride a bike, who had cried at their mother's funeral, who had once driven 4 hours at 2 in the morning because she'd called him from a bad situation at a party and hadn't known who else to call. That same person had signed her name to a contract selling her to men who owned women. I'm sorry, he said. Mani, I'm sorry, I didn't... There was no other... Don't, she said. The 2 men had started moving toward her, slow, flanking. She watched them. She kept very still. It's just for a while, her brother said, and she could hear how much he needed to believe that, how desperately he'd constructed a version of this that he could live inside. They said, Don't, she said again. He reached for her arm. The lights came, 4 of them, from both ends of the alley simultaneously, blinding white, from vehicles that had arrived without sound, or with sound she hadn't been able to hear over the rain and her own blood. SUVs dark. No plates she could see, and men getting out of them with the specific, unhurried purpose of people who have already decided how this ends. Min Jae came last. He walked through the alley like a man crossing his own living room. No weapon visible, no urgency. The rain had darkened the shoulders of his coat. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to be clearly intentional and looked at her brother the way a person looks at an equation they've already solved. "She's not going with you," he said. Her brother looked at the men, looked at the SUVs, looked at Min Jae. Something was happening in his face, something collapsing, some last structural support giving way. You don't know what you're doing," he said. "These people, they have a contract. They're going to—" "I know exactly what they have," Min Jae said, "and I know exactly what I'm doing." He looked then at Amani. Just a look, a question. She walked toward him. Her brother said her name, Mani, in a voice that broke in the middle, and she kept walking, and she reached Min Jae's side, and she did not look back. The two men from the van had stopped moving. One of Min Jae's men, a lean, quiet man with a scar through his left eyebrow, who had appeared from nowhere, leaned close to the two strangers and said something so quietly she couldn't hear it, and whatever he said made both of them step back toward the van without argument. "Tell your people," Min Jae said to her brother, "that the contract will be addressed. Tonight. Tell them not to send anyone." "I can't. They won't." "Tell them," Min Jae said, "and then go home." Her brother looked at Amani one last time. She had nothing to give him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. She looked at the wall just past his shoulder and waited until she heard his footsteps move away through the rain. Min Jae turned toward the lead SUV. "Get in out of the rain," he said to her, quietly. Not a command, just a practical observation. "We have work to do." She got in. She didn't know his name yet. Not his real name, not the weight of it. She didn't know the city feared him. She didn't know what kind of world she'd just stepped into at the edge of, or how far in she was about to go. She knew her brother had sold her. She knew a stranger had stopped him. She knew the rain was drumming on the roof of the SUV and the seats were black leather, and someone had put a bottle of water on the seat beside her without being asked. And she was so tired, so deep bone tired, that she put her head back against the seat and closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that the night was not closing in. Just yet. The water bottle was still cold in her hand when the SUV moved. She hadn't opened it. She was holding it against her chest like it was something to hold on to, which it was, which was embarrassing, but the leather seat was warm and the rain was loud on the roof, and her body had finally stopped running on pure adrenaline and was now presenting the bill for the last 12 hours of her life. Her hands were shaking, not violently, just a fine, persistent tremor, the kind that lives in the aftermath of fear rather than the middle of it. She looked out the window. The alley was gone. The diner was gone. Her brother was standing somewhere in the rain behind her, and she made herself not think about his face when she'd walked away, the way it had crumpled like wet paper, because if she thought about it, she would feel something she couldn't afford to feel right now. The man with the scar through his eyebrow was in the passenger seat. He hadn't spoken to her. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with his thumb, like the last 20 minutes had been a routine errand. There was a driver she hadn't gotten a good look at. Min Jae was beside her in the back seat, and he was on the phone. Not a call, typing something fast with two thumbs, his face angled down and lit faintly blue. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere dry," he said, without looking up. That's not an answer. He finished what he was typing, pocketed the phone. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her then, and in the ambient light from passing street lamps she could see his face more clearly than she had in the diner. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the particular quality of his stillness up close, which was different from someone at rest. It was the stillness of someone who spent energy on maintaining it. "We're going to a place I use for meetings. It's clean, it's private, and no one will bother you there. After that, we're going to talk about the contract." "The Black Serpents," she said. "Yes. You know them." "I know of them. We've never had direct business." She turned that over. What kind of business do you do? A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to lie, but the pause of someone deciding how much truth was useful. I run things, he said, in this city. What kinds of things? The kinds of things that don't get discussed in diners. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same level patience he'd had since booth 6. And she thought about her brother's 2 friends stepping back from the van without a word, and she thought about 4 SUVs appearing from nowhere in a rainy alley, and she understood that she had a rough idea of the answer to her own question. You're in the mob, she said. That word has a lot of flavors, he said. Korean organized crime. You're direct. I'd rather know what I'm in than wonder about it. He considered this. Then yes, in the broadest terms. She breathed in slowly, out slowly. The tremor in her hands was still there. So I traded one dangerous man for another. That's a fair assessment. Most people would lie. Most people aren't asking me at 11 at night after I pulled them out of an alley. The SUV turned onto a broader street, better lit, the kind of street where the buildings had working facades and the trash was picked up on schedule. She watched the city change texture through the window. Rain made everything look like a memory of itself, slightly blurred, slightly distant. Why? She asked. Why what? Why me? Why any of this? You don't know me. You had pie and coffee and a quiet night, and you... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Why? He looked out his own window. Something moved through his profile. Not quite expression, more like weather. Brief, and then gone. I have a sister, he said. Younger. She's in Seoul. We don't speak much now. A pause. When she was 19, something happened to her that shouldn't have. I was here. I found out 3 months later. Amani said nothing. I couldn't fix it, he said. I had all the resources I have now, and I couldn't fix it because I was too far away and I found out too late. So I'm what? Unfinished business. No. He turned back to her. You're a person in a diner who told me the truth when you didn't have to. That's all. The rest is just me having a bad memory and an empty Tuesday night. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away, didn't shift, didn't perform anything. He just sat there in his expensive coat being exactly what he was. Okay, she said. Okay. She finally opened the water bottle. Drank. Outside, the rain was coming harder. The building they arrived at looked like a financial services office from the outside. Glass and brushed steel, a lobby with recessed lighting, the kind of anonymous professional aesthetic that existed specifically to not attract attention. The man at the front desk nodded to Min-jae with the practiced blankness of someone paid well for practiced blankness, and they went up 2 floors to a room that had a conference table, a couch against one wall, and a small kitchen alcove with a coffee maker that looked like it actually worked. Haewon, the man with the scar, whose name she learned when Min-jae said it, sat up at the table and opened a laptop. He had the focused, slightly closed expression of someone doing precise work and preferring not to be interrupted. His scar, she noticed now, was older than it looked at first glance. Fully healed, silver-white rather than pink, which put it at least 5 or 6 years back. A woman she hadn't met was already in the room. Late 30s, Korean, hair pulled back tight, reading something on a tablet. She looked up when they came in and looked at Amani with the quick, complete assessment of someone who had learned to read people fast because her survival had depended on it. This is her? She said. Mina, Min-jae said, in a tone that was not quite a warning but was in the same neighborhood. I'm just asking. Mina set down the tablet. I pulled what I could on the black serpents. You want it now? When she's settled. I'm settled, Amani said. Both of them looked at her. She had said it more sharply than she intended, the word coming out with a hard edge that surprised even her. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, and she was not settled at all. Her whole body felt like a wire pulled too tight. But she did not want to be talked around, organized, processed. She'd been processed enough for one lifetime. Tell me what you found, she said to Mina. Mina looked at The Black Serpents have been working the dockside corridor for about 8 years. Started as an extortion operation, moved into loan sharking, which is how your father got involved. The woman brokering piece is about 3 years old. They franchise it, sort of. 3 clubs plus private contracts for domestic placement. She said this with the flat efficiency of a person reporting data rather than describing human lives. And Amani watched her face while she talked and understood that this was how Mina survived knowing the things she knew. The paper contract your brother signed is real. We pulled records. They do this with paper deliberately because it's harder to trace and because they've had arrangements with a couple of people in the county records office in the past. The debt figure is $80,000, but with the interest they've applied since it originated 2 years ago, the number Min Jae would need to present to clear it is... She glanced at the laptop where Jae-won was working. Jay? 87.4, Jae-won said, without looking up. They've been running a 15% monthly penalty since the 90-day mark. Amani heard the number and felt something cold move through her. $87,400. She had about $900 in her bank account. She made $11 an hour plus tips. She had been working since she was 16, and she had never in her life had more than $3,000 at one time. That number is manageable, Min Jae said. She looked at him. For you? Yes. You'd pay that. I'd present it. There's a difference. Paying implies they have a right to collect. Presenting implies they have an opportunity to walk away from this without a problem. And if they don't take the opportunity... The silence that followed that question had a different quality than the silences before it. Jae-won had stopped typing. Mina had set down the tablet. Then they have a problem, Min Jae said simply. Amani sat with that. She had grown up in this city. She knew what men like this meant when they spoke that way. She'd known it abstractly, the way you know the mechanics of something you've never directly encountered. Now she was sitting in the room where it was decided, and the distance between abstract and real was paper thin. My father, she said, and my brother. Min Jae looked at her. What happens to them? What do you want to happen to them? She opened her mouth, closed it. What an impossible question. What a genuinely, completely impossible question to answer sitting here at 11:15 at night, with her coat still damp and her hands still aching from bruises that were a week old but looked like they'd been put there recently because new ones had been added on top. I don't want them hurt, she said finally. Okay, but She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes, breathed. They signed my name to a contract. My brother looked me in the eye this morning and told me I was going to go work for those men because he needed the money. Yes, she couldn't find the word. That's not a mistake. That's not something that happened. He chose it. He thought about it, and he chose it. Yes, Min Jae said again. His voice had not changed. He was not offering her comfort or confirmation or any particular emotional direction. He was just present, and somehow that was more useful than anything else he could have done. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry. She had run out of whatever capacity she had for tears about 2 hours ago. Whatever you need to do, she said. Just don't kill them. They're still... She stopped. Just don't kill them. Min Jae nodded once. Jae, he said, set up a meeting with the Serpents for tomorrow morning. Park or Lim? Park. He's the one who'd have signed off on the contract, so he's the one who can void it. Mina said, they're not going to love being summoned. No, Min Jae agreed, especially by you. You and the Serpents have stayed out of each other's way for 4 years. That ends tomorrow. She said it carefully. 4 years is a long time to maintain a boundary. It is, he said, but boundaries are practical arrangements. They're not permanent. He looked at her, Mina, not Amani, with an expression that was almost mild. Schedule it for 9. Mina looked like she wanted to push further and decided not to. She picked up her phone. In the kitchen alcove, a kettle started heating without anyone switching it on. Jae-won had leaned over and hit the button at some point without pausing his work, and Amani noticed it now, that small ambient gesture of a man who had been in a lot of long nights and had developed habits for them. She watched the steam start. You should sleep, Minjae said to her. I won't. Probably not, but there's a room through that door with a lock on the inside and the lock works, and I'm the only person in this building with a key, and I will not use it, if that matters. She looked at the door, looked back at him. You're very careful about how you phrase things. When it's important, why is it important? To you specifically. With me. He thought about this. Genuinely thought she could see it, not performing consideration, but actually doing it. Because the last person who made decisions about your life didn't ask you, he said. That seems like a thing worth correcting. She stood. Her legs were steadier than she expected. She picked up the water bottle and then set it back down and then picked it up again. She walked to the door he'd indicated. At the threshold, she stopped. Minjae, she said. His name, for the first time. She'd heard Mina and Chaewon use it. Yes. If this goes wrong tomorrow, the meeting, the contract, it won't. If it does. He met her eyes across the room, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before, or hadn't recognized before. Not arrogance, not the casual confidence of a man who'd never been beaten. Something more like scar tissue. The certainty of someone who had been wrong before and had absorbed the cost of it and had kept going. If it does, he said, I'll find another way. And another after that. She looked at him for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she went through the door and locked it behind her. The room was small and clean. The bed was made with military precision. There was a window with the blinds already closed. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and sat there for a long time in the dark, not sleeping, not crying, just existing in the specific silence of a night that had not yet finished with her. She thought about her brother's voice. I'm sorry, Mani. She thought about the contract, her name on a piece of paper she'd never touched, in a transaction she'd never agreed to, exchanging her body and her freedom for a debt she hadn't run up. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs. Steadied. At some point she lay down without deciding to. At some point the sound of the rain against the window became the kind of steady noise that the exhausted brain uses as an exit, and she slept without meaning to, hard and dreamless, the way the body takes what it needs when the mind finally stops arguing. She woke to voices. Not loud voices. They were being careful, she could tell, or as careful as the conversation allowed, which was not very. Through the door, she could make out Minjae's voice, and a second one she didn't recognize, male, older, with an accent she placed as somewhere regional, Chicago maybe, or further Midwest. And the tone was wrong. Not the clipped, efficient tone of people working. This was the tone of a disagreement that had been going on long enough to stop being polite. She checked her phone. 3:47 in the morning. She sat up. Listened. Told you when you took her out of that alley you were making a move. The unfamiliar voice. Whether you meant it that way or not. I know what I did, Minjae. You walked into a situation that had nothing to do with your territory and you planted a flag. The serpents aren't stupid. Park will have people in place by morning and the meeting at 9. If you walk in there with $87,000 in cash, you're not buying out a contract. You're buying territory. You know what that looks like. I know what it looks like. Then you know that buying her out of this doesn't end it. You know what they're going to read it as. A silence. Then, yes. And you're still doing it. Yes. Minjae. The older voice dropped lower, lost the edge, picked up something that sounded almost like appeal. I've been with you 11 years. I'm not arguing with the decision. I'm telling you to go in with both eyes open about what you're starting. This isn't a clean transaction. This is a line in the ground. And once it's there, I know. Do you? Because an hour ago you were telling me this was a simple, I know, sung. Minjae's voice was quiet and complete and not interested in the rest of the sentence. I know what it is. I knew what it was when I sat down in that booth. A long pause. All right, Sung said. Then I need to make some calls before 9. That's why I called you. Footsteps. A door somewhere. Then quiet. Amani sat in the dark room with her hand on the door lock and her heart running faster than sleep should leave it, and she thought about the phrase line in the ground. And she thought about what Mina had said about 4 years of maintained distance, and she began to understand, not completely, not all at once, but the shape of it, that whatever was happening tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock was not just about her. That it may have started with her, but the men in this building were already talking about it in terms that went far beyond a girl in a diner and a bad debt. That she was, in ways she hadn't agreed to, a reason. She didn't know how she felt about that. She pressed her back against the headboard and looked at the closed blinds and tried to organize her thoughts into something usable, and mostly what she came up with was, too tired, too late, not enough information. So she breathed. She counted her breaths the way she had learned to do at 16 when everything in her house was chaos, and she needed something that only she controlled. In, out, in, out. At 4:15, she heard Min Jae's footsteps stop outside her door. She didn't move. She was not afraid, which surprised her. She noted it, the absence of fear, replaced by something more like vigilance, the functional cousin of fear. He didn't knock. He stood there for maybe 15 seconds, she could tell by the shadow under the door, and then he moved on. She didn't sleep again after that. By 7, she was out of the room. The conference table had 3 coffee cups on it from the night, and Chae-won was still there, or back, she couldn't tell which, at the laptop, looking like a man who had agreed long ago that sleep was optional. He looked up when she came out. Coffee maker is in the alcove, he said. Beans are in the cabinet above. She made coffee. She was grateful for the task, the grinding, the measuring, the specific mechanical sequence of it. She made enough for the room and set the pot on the table. Thank you, Chae-won said, in a tone that suggested this was not something he said automatically. You've been up all night? I work better without interruption. She sat across from him with her own cup. What are you working on? He looked at her over the top of the laptop. Research on Park's operation, the Serpent's current holdings, known associates, the physical layout of their main warehouse where they keep records. A pause. Also your family's debt documentation. I've been reconstructing the full ledger from available records to verify the 87-4 and make sure there's no secondary debt he might try to introduce at the table. Secondary debt. It's a common tactic. They bring you in to settle one thing and produce paperwork for another. Having your own documentation prevents that. She looked at her coffee. You do this kind of thing often, when it's needed. Do you? She stopped. Started differently. Does he do this kind of thing often, Min Jae? Chae-won's expression didn't shift, but something in his posture changed slightly, the way someone settles more firmly into a position before speaking carefully. He does what's necessary, he said. The parameters of what's necessary vary. That's a very neutral answer. I'm a very neutral person. She almost smiled. Almost. The door opened and Min Jae came in, coat off for the first time since she'd met him. Charcoal suit underneath, no tie, collar button open, which on another man might look casual, but on him looked like a decision. He looked at the coffee pot, looked at her, looked at Chae-won. Where are we? He said to Chae-won. Documentation is solid. Park's main location is the warehouse on Crescent and the 14th. He holds meetings there, keeps his records there. He'll want home territory for the 9 o'clock. Let him have it. Sung wants 2 additional men on the perimeter. 4. Chae-won made a note. Mina is bringing the cash? She has it. Amani looked up. You already had it ready? I had it pulled when we arrived last night, Min Jae said. He was pouring coffee, back half turned to her. You were that certain. I wasn't certain of anything. I just prepared for the possibility. He turned around with the cup. There's food coming at 8. You should eat before we go. I'm going? If you want to. She set down her cup. You're asking me. It's your contract, your life. He sat across from her, at the head of the table. She noticed he'd moved naturally to the position that had the best sightline to the door, without making a production of it. You can wait here. You can come. It might be useful for Park to see you. Not as a prop, but because men like him sometimes underestimate what they're looking at when the person they tried to buy is standing in front of them, looking fine. Looking fine, she repeated. Looking like a person, he said, instead of a transaction. She thought about it for perhaps 3 seconds. I'm going, she said. Something changed in Min-jae's face. Small, almost nothing, like a single degree of temperature difference, but she caught it. All right, he said. At 8:15, food arrived. Containers from somewhere, hot, more than anyone could eat, and she understood this too was a system, a way of making sure people who did demanding work had fuel for it. She ate without appetite, but with discipline. She was going to need to be present at 9 o'clock and present required blood sugar, and blood sugar required food, and she worked through a container of rice and vegetables and drank a second cup of coffee and watched Chae-won and Mina and the other men come and go from the room with the particular efficiency of an operation that had run many mornings like this one, even if the specifics were different. At 8:50, Min-jae appeared at her shoulder. Ready? He said. She had no coat. She was still in her diner uniform, black pants, white shirt, and she had pulled her hair back with a rubber band she'd found in the bathroom. And she had no makeup and no preparation, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had been awake for a very long time after a very bad night. She stood up straight. Ready? She said. The Serpent's warehouse was 20 minutes across the city. She watched the neighborhoods change through tinted glass and said nothing, and Min-jae said nothing, and Chae-won, in the front seat again, was on his phone speaking quietly in Korean, and Mina, in the trailing SUV, was a presence she could feel even through the vehicles, steady and watchful. When they turned onto Crescent, she could see the warehouse from 2 blocks out. 3 of the Serpent's men were visible on the exterior, so deliberately visible, she understood, chosen for visibility, message sending. We know who's coming. We are not impressed. Min-jae looked at them without expression. Whatever happens in there, he said to her without turning, say as little as possible. Watch Park's hands when he speaks. If I put my hand on the table, take a step back. Not far. Just 1 step. Signal? Yes. What does it mean? It means get behind me. She absorbed this. Her heart was doing something controlled and rapid, not panic, closer to focus. Okay, she said. They pulled up. The men on the exterior watched. Chae-won got out first, then Min-jae, then Amani, and she stepped out into cold morning air and stood on the wet sidewalk outside a dockside warehouse at 5 minutes to 9, wearing a diner uniform, and felt something clarify in her chest. She had been handled and sold and struck and carried and herded, and now she was standing here on her own feet going through a door of her own choosing. And there was something in that, something stubborn and irreducible that nobody in her life had ever quite managed to kill. The warehouse was cold inside. High ceilings, stored pallets of shrink-wrapped goods she didn't examine, industrial lights throwing yellow onto concrete. A long table had been set up near the center of the floor, the kind of arrangement that was meant to evoke neutrality, while being clearly not neutral at all. The Serpents had 6 men visible, and there were probably more she couldn't see, and at the head of the table sat a man who could only be Park. He was heavy-set, mid-50s, wearing a tracksuit that cost more than Amani made in a month. He had the look of a man who had not been surprised in a long time, who had arranged his life specifically to avoid surprise. His hands were flat on the table. He looked at Min-jae and then, slowly, at Amani, and something moved behind his eyes that she didn't like at all. Kang Min-jae, he said, this is unexpected. I called ahead, Min-jae said. Calling ahead doesn't make it less unexpected. Park's eyes were still on Amani. This is the girl? Her name is Amani Brooks, Min-jae said. His voice did not change, but the emphasis was there, clean and unmistakable. Her name. And we're here to settle the matter of your contract. Park looked at him then, tilted his head. The matter of my contract, he repeated, like he was testing the flavor of the phrase. Not her contract, not her family's debt. My contract. A small smile. Not warm. You're already telling me something, coming in here and calling it that. I'm telling you it's a transaction, Min-jae said. Nothing more. Park leaned back. 4 years, you and I stay out of each other's business. 4 years, very professional, very clean. And then one Tuesday night, some waitress has a bad situation, and here you are in my warehouse with... He gestured at the briefcase Mina had set on the table. "What I'm guessing is a very tidy sum, and a face that says you've already decided how this ends." "The debt is $87,400 by your own accounting," Min-jae said. "I have $90,000 in that case. The difference is for your inconvenience." Park didn't look at the case. "The contract isn't about the money," he said. Something shifted in the room. It was physical, actual air pressure, something in the attention of every person present that pulled slightly tighter. "Then what's it about?" Min-jae said. Park looked at Amani again. And this time the look was slower, more deliberate, the look of a man making a statement rather than an assessment, and she held it. She did not look away, did not drop her eyes, and she felt her jaw tighten and her hands go still at her sides. "It's about what it means," Park said, "when a man walks into my business and tells me one of my contracts doesn't count because he's decided to be interested. Because if I take that money and walk away quietly," he spread his hands, "then the next man who wants to play hero sends me cash and takes what's mine and the next and the next. You understand my position?" "I understand it," Min-jae said. "Then you understand why I can't just—" "I understand it, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter," Min-jae said. "Because this particular contract—" He reached into his coat and set a folded document on the table, and Amani realized Jae-won must have obtained a copy at some point in the night, was signed fraudulently. The name on it belongs to a person who was not present and did not consent. In any jurisdiction that functions, that's void. You know this. I know this. Park looked at the document, looked at Min-jae. His jaw shifted slightly, a small grinding motion. "You come in here with lawyers' arguments," he said. "I came in here with $90,000 and a practical offer," Min-jae said. "The lawyer's argument is in case you prefer the alternative." A long silence. Park's hands, flat on the table, pressed slightly harder against the surface. She could see the tendons in the backs of them. "And if I say no," Park said. Min-jae looked at him, just looked, with the same absolute patience he'd had in booth 6 over a piece of cherry pie and a cup of coffee, the patience of a man for whom the current moment was simply one in a very long sequence. "Then we have a different conversation," Min-jae said. "And that conversation ends differently for both of us, but mostly for you." Park looked at Amani one last time. She looked back. He picked up the document. Read it for a moment, set it down, looked at the briefcase. Something moved through his face. Not defeat, not quite, but the specific expression of a man recalculating what the situation is going to cost him versus what refusing it would cost instead, running the numbers in real time, arriving at an answer he doesn't love but can live with. He reached across the table. Min-jae did not move. He let Park make the gesture. Park pulled the briefcase toward him. "The contract is settled," Park said to the room, more than to either of them, performing it for his own men. "Debt is cleared. The girl walks." "And the original document," Min-jae said. Park looked at him. "The paper your man had her brother sign. I want it." A pause. Park signaled someone at the edge of the room, and after a moment an envelope appeared on the table, and Min-jae reached across and took it without opening it, and handed it to Amani. She held it. The paper inside was thin enough that she could feel it through the envelope. Her name on it. Or what someone had decided was her name, in someone else's handwriting, on a document that had tried to make her into a line item. "We're done here," Min-jae said. They turned to leave. "Kang," Park's voice behind them. Min-jae stopped. Did not turn. "You made a statement this morning," Park said. "Whether you meant to or not." "I know," Min-jae said. "Other people are going to read it." "I know that too." He walked to the door. She walked beside him. She could feel Park's eyes on her back the entire length of the warehouse floor, heavy and specific, and she kept her chin level and her step even, and she did not hurry because hurrying would mean something, and she had decided she was done meaning things for other people. Outside, the morning had cleared slightly. The rain stopped, the sky above the warehouse district pale and cold and new. She stood on the wet concrete, and she looked at the envelope in her hands. Min-jae stood beside her, looking at the street. "That was the easy part," he said, and his voice was very quiet. She looked at him. "My father," she said, And my brother. They're still out there. They still... She stopped. The serpents aren't the only thing they owe. No, he said. They're not. The debt is paid. My contract is gone, but they're going to do this again. She felt the certainty of it in her chest, cold and factual. To someone else, if not to me. My father is going to gamble, my brother is going to try to fix it, and someone is going to get... She stopped herself. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then we need to make sure, he said slowly, that there is no one left who will take that kind of payment from them. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means we're not finished yet, he said. Not even close. He opened the SUV door. He waited. She looked at the envelope one last time. Her name. Someone else's handwriting. She slid it inside her uniform pocket. Pocket against her ribs, where she could feel the edges of it. The SUV was moving before she finished closing the door. She felt it in her stomach. That particular lurch of momentum when a decision has been made and the body is simply catching up to it. She had the envelope pressed against her ribs through the fabric of her uniform shirt, and she could feel its edges with every breath, a paper rectangle that had been someone's attempt to reduce her to a number and had failed. And she was trying to decide how she felt about that, and mostly what she felt was not relief, but something harder and less comfortable than relief. Min-jae was on his phone again, Korean, fast, clipped. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the rhythm. Questions and answers, logistics, the language of people moving pieces across a board. She looked out the window. The dockside district scrolled past, warehouses and chain link, and the distant smell of the water underneath everything else. A man in a yellow vest was power washing a sidewalk outside a fish processing building, and the water ran gray into the gutter, and she watched it until it disappeared. My father, she said when Min-jae ended the call. Where is he right now? Home, most likely. Chaewon has someone watching the house. She turned to look at him. Since when? Since last night. You put surveillance on my family without telling me. I put eyes on a situation that wasn't fully contained, he said. I should have told you. She processed this. He had said should have, not was going to bet. The honesty of that registered. And my brother? Same location. They both went back to the house around midnight. You knew where they were all night? Yes. She turned back to the window. Okay, she said after a moment. Are you angry? I'm deciding. He didn't push. She had noticed this about him. The way he created space rather than filling it, the way he treated her silences as things that had content rather than gaps to be smoothed over. She wasn't sure whether this was a quality of his character or a skill he had developed, and she wasn't sure the distinction mattered. I need to see them, she said. Your father and brother. Yes. Why? She thought about it. The real answer, not the first answer. Because whatever you're planning to do next, whatever we're planning, they deserve to hear it from me. Not from a man they don't know showing up at their door. From me. She felt something tighten in her chest. And because I have things to say that I should have said a long time ago, and I'm running out of reasons to wait. Min-jae was quiet for a beat. All right, he said. We'll go there first. I need you to wait outside. Amani, I need you to wait outside, she said again, not aggressively, but with a completeness that made it clear the sentence was finished. This part is mine. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression. Not quite worry, something adjacent. If it goes wrong, I'll come get you. If it goes wrong fast, Min-jae. She said his name the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop. I have been managing them my whole life. I know how they go wrong. I know what the warning signs look like. I will come get you if I need you. A pause. But I need you to let me do this. He looked out the front windshield, exhaled through his nose. Chaewon stays at the door. Fine. Not inside. At the door. Fine. He nodded once and said something brief to Chaewon in Korean, and Chaewon said nothing back, which she was beginning to understand was Chaewon's version of agreement. The house was in Garfield, A narrow two-story with aluminum siding that had been white once and was now the color of old dishwater. The porch had a broken step that had been broken for 4 years that she could remember, probably longer. There was a car in the driveway she didn't recognize. Older model Pontiac, primer patched on the passenger door, which meant either her father had traded again or they had company. She sat in the SUV looking at it for a moment. This house. She had grown up in it. She had learned to walk in it, burned her hand on the stove in the kitchen at age 7, sat on the second-floor landing at age 14 listening to her parents fight below and counting the roses on the wallpaper to stay calm. She had left it at 18 and come back twice. Once when her mother died, once when her father's first health crisis turned out to be less serious than feared, and both times she had felt the house pulling at her like gravity, the specific gravity of places that shaped you, and she had resisted it both times and gone back to her apartment and her job and the life she was assembling from the parts available to her. Now she was back a third time, with an envelope against her ribs and a man she'd met 12 hours ago waiting at the curb, and the broken porch step was still broken. She got out of the car. Chaewon fell in beside her without a word and then stopped at the foot of the porch stairs when she went up, which she appreciated, and she knocked on the door of her father's house the way you knock on a door when you are bracing yourself for what's on the other side. Her father opened it. Henry Brooks was 61 years old and looked 70, or had for the last several years. The particular aging that comes from stress and alcohol and a body that had been worked hard and rested poorly. He was wearing a flannel shirt she recognized, the gray one with the fraying cuffs, and he had a coffee cup in his hand, and when he saw her, his face did something complicated and fast. Relief first, then something harder underneath the relief, then a kind of collapsing that she didn't have a word for but recognized as the expression of a man who has been waiting for a reckoning and is both dreading and relieved it has finally arrived. "Amani," he said. "Dad." She kept her voice even. "Let me in." He stepped back. She went past him into the house and the smell of it hit her. Coffee and something fried from earlier, and beneath that the faint underlying sweetness of old cigarettes. Though her father hadn't smoked in years, the smell just lived in the walls now. The living room was cluttered in the specific way of a space where someone had stopped seeing the mess. Papers on every surface, a TV on with the sound muted, takeout containers on the coffee table. Her brother was on the couch. Darius was 26, 2 years older than her, and he had their mother's eyes and their father's jaw, and right now he was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him like a man at a funeral. And when she walked in, he looked up, and his whole face opened with something that was 90% relief and 10% the particular guilt of someone who has been sitting alone with what they did for too long. "You're okay," he said. "Mani, Don't," she said. He closed his mouth. She stood in the middle of the living room. She had planned on the drive over to keep this calm, measured. She had a list in her head, things that needed to be said, things that needed to be resolved. And she had intended to work through it with the same flat efficiency she'd watched Mina use the night before. Information management, facts, and outcomes. She had intended this. What she actually felt, standing in her father's living room with the muted TV flickering behind her and the smell of old walls around her and her brother, looking at her with those eyes, was a rage so deep and so old it didn't feel like heat. It felt like bedrock. It felt like something that had been there for years and years and had just finally been given a name. "You signed my name," she said to Darius. Her voice was very quiet. "I know. You sat in this room or wherever you sat, and you wrote my name on a document that said I would work for men who sell women. You made that choice, consciously, with your own hand. There was no other. Don't." The word was so flat it stopped him physically, a slight backward motion. "Don't tell me there was no other way. Don't tell me it was the only choice. You had other choices. You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth about the debt. You could have gone to the police, or a lawyer, or a shelter, or literally any other human being in this city besides the men you owed money to. You chose this because it was the path of least resistance for you, because it cost you nothing." Darius's jaw tightened. "You don't know what—" "It cost you nothing," she said again. "Say that back to me. It cost you nothing. My name, my body, my future. And you paid nothing. Say it." "Amani?" Her father from behind her. Not yet, Dad. She didn't turn. She kept her eyes on Darius. Say it. Her brother looked at his hands. His jaw was working. She could see the cords in his neck standing out, and she could see him cycling through arguments and rejections and justifications, and she watched him try on each one and discard it until there was nothing left, and he was just sitting there with the truth of what he'd done, undefended. I'm sorry, he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. Money, I am so sorry. I know you are, she said. Right now. In this moment, looking at me, you're sorry, and I believe that. She breathed. But you were sorry the last time you hit me too, and the time before that, and Dad was sorry. And somehow sorry kept happening, and the things that caused it kept happening, and nobody changed anything. She turned to her father then. Henry Brooks had the expression of a man who has been standing on a gallows long enough that the anticipation has become its own kind of existence. He was holding his coffee cup with both hands. His knuckles were pale. I'm not going to stand here and undo 30 years, Amani said. I'm not trying to do that, but I need you to understand something, both of you, and I need you to actually hear it. She looked at her father, then her brother. It's done. What happened last night is done. The debt is paid. The contract doesn't exist anymore. I'm not going to explain how because it doesn't matter how. What matters is what happens now. Who paid the debt? Her father said. His voice was rough. Something in his face was moving between gratitude and a wounded, complicated pride. Someone who had the means to. Who? A man I met. The silence that followed had a specific texture. She watched her father's face change, the gratitude and the pride rearranging themselves into something more guarded, more searching, the face of a man reading the space between words. What man? He said. Someone who helped me. That's all you need to know. Amani, that's all you need to know, Dad. She held his gaze. He's not a threat to you. He's not owed anything from this family. He settled it because he chose to, and I'm not going to explain his reasons because, frankly, they're better reasons than either of you deserve right now. Her father looked down at his coffee. The gallows expression had come back, deeper now, because this was worse somehow. To be saved by a stranger, to have your daughter stand in your living room and tell you that a man you've never met made good on your failures, then the reckoning he'd been expecting. I need to know one thing, Amani said, and I need the truth, the actual truth, not the version that makes you feel better. She looked at Darius. Is there more debt? Anywhere else? Anyone else you owe? Darius looked up. Something happened in his eyes, something quick, an involuntary flicker, the kind the body produces before the mind can run its editing process. And she felt a cold, precise drop in her stomach, the specific feeling of catching someone in the instant before they decide to lie. Darius, he stopped, rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand. There's one other thing. The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. How much? She said. It's not the same kind of debt. It's not the serpent's. How much? 42,000. He said it quietly into his hands. She stood very still. Who? A man named Reeves. He runs a private book out of the North Side. He's been patient, he said. Mani, he gave Dad 6 months on the original. When did the 6 months end? Darius looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed in a way she hadn't noticed until now, which meant he'd either been crying or hadn't slept, possibly both. 3 weeks ago, he said. She had to breathe very deliberately to keep her face from doing something she didn't want it to do. 3 weeks. The debt to Reeves had been overdue for 3 weeks, which meant when Darius had signed her name to the Serpent's contract, he had already known about Reeves, which meant the contract hadn't been a desperate last resort. It had been, she ran the logic and felt it land with a cold, solid weight. It had been a solution for one debt while another was accumulating. Her brother hadn't been trying to save the family. He'd been triage. He had used her to buy himself time. Darius. She heard something in her own voice she didn't recognize. Not anger now, something past anger, the frozen end of it where there's no temperature left. When you signed my name, you knew about Reeves. I was going to... You knew. He didn't answer. He looked at the floor, and that was its own answer, final and complete. A silence she could feel closing around her like water. She turned and walked to the front door. She opened it. Chewan was on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the street. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him take out his phone without being asked. "Tell Min-jae to come in," she said. She went back inside and stood in the middle of the living room and waited. She heard Min-jae's footsteps on the porch steps, heard the broken one creak its specific creak, heard him come through the door she'd left open. He stopped beside her. She could feel him reading the room, her face, her father's face, her brother's posture, with the rapid, comprehensive attention of someone who has walked into many rooms where things have already gone wrong. "There's a second debt," she said to him. 42,000, different creditor, 3 weeks overdue. A beat of silence. "Who's the creditor?" "A man named Reeves." She heard something happen in the quality of Min-jae's silence. Not a sound. An absence of the ordinary micro-sounds of a person. A stillness that went a degree further than his usual stillness. And it was a specific enough change that she turned to look at him. His face was composed, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. Some internal recalculation, something being processed at a level below the surface. And whatever he found there did not improve what she saw. "Reeves," he said, flat. "You know him." "Of him. Is he like the serpents?" A pause. "No," he said. "He's not like the serpents." "Then what?" "He's worse," Min-jae said. The word landed in the room without drama. He hadn't said it for effect. He'd said it the way a doctor gives a diagnosis. The information is what it is. The emotion around it is separate. Her father made a small sound from across the room. Not a word, just the compressed exhale of a man absorbing impact. "How much worse?" she said. "Reeves operates completely outside conventional structures," Min-jae said. "He doesn't have organization like the serpents do. What he has is..." He paused, choosing. "He has connections. Political, legal. Men in positions who owe him. Which means he doesn't resolve debts the same way other men do." "What does that mean, practically?" "It means he doesn't want the money." Min-jae looked at her father. "What did he tell you would happen if you couldn't pay?" Henry Brooks looked like a man having a very slow-motion accident. He said... His voice was hoarse. He said there were other arrangements. He didn't say it directly, but his man came by 2 weeks ago and he said that Mr. Reeves would be willing to discuss alternatives. He pressed his lips together. "I didn't ask what the alternatives were." "Because you didn't want to know," Amani said. He didn't answer. She looked at Min-jae. "Why does it matter that he has political connections? If you can pay him the same way..." "Because 42,000 isn't the real number," Min-jae said. "With Reeves, the money is a vehicle. What he actually collects is leverage. He loans to people who can't pay so that he owns the debt and the person both." He looked at her steadily. "If I walk in and settle this the same way I settled the serpents, cash on the table, contract voided, Reeves doesn't take it as a transaction. He takes it as someone acquiring his asset." "His asset," she said. "Your family." He said it without softening it. "He'll read it as me moving against him, and Reeves doesn't negotiate responses. He escalates them." "So what does that mean? We can't pay him off." "We can pay him," Min-jae said, "but not quietly. We'd have to go in with enough visible force to make him understand that escalating would cost him more than walking away. And that..." He stopped. His jaw moved slightly, something shifting. "That changes what this is." "Explain that." He looked at her for a moment, and in his face she saw the particular expression of someone who had been hoping not to have this conversation yet, and understood that hoping was over. "Last night I moved against the serpents," he said. "This morning I sat at their table and paid their debt and walked out with their contract. That's already a statement to certain people in this city about where I'm standing. If I move against Reeves now, within 24 hours of that, it stops being two separate incidents." he breathed. It looks like a campaign. Is that bad? It depends who's watching and what they decide to do about it. Is it bad? She said again. It's complicated, he said. Min Jae. She said his name with the same completeness as before, the same full stop. Is it bad? He looked at her. Yes, he said. If Reeves reads it that way and goes to the people he knows, the people in places, then what I did this morning stops being a favor and becomes a provocation. And a provocation from me will have a response, not from Reeves directly, from the infrastructure he's embedded in. You're talking about police, officials, among others. She sat down, not on the couch, on the arm of the worn armchair by the window, on the edge of it, perched, because sitting fully felt like a surrender she wasn't ready for. She pressed her palms against her thighs, breathed. Darius was watching Min Jae with an expression that had moved through several stages and was currently somewhere between frightened and stripped of pretense. Who are you? He said quietly. Someone trying to help your sister, Min Jae said. It was not quite an answer, and they both knew it. What do you want from her? Darius, Amani said. No. Her brother's voice had something raw in it now, the specific rawness of someone who has done an indefensible thing and is now watching someone else clean it up and cannot make that okay by any internal logic. No, I want to know, because she was in a diner last night and now she's here with men I don't know, and people watched our house all night, and she's talking about debts being paid and contracts, and you created this situation, Min Jae said. Not cruelly, just as a fact. What's happening now is a result of the choice you made. I understand that's difficult to look at. Darius's hands balled into fists on his knees. I know what I did. Then you understand why she's here with men you don't know. A silence in which Darius looked at his sister and she looked back at him, and neither of them looked away. And whatever passed between them in that look had years in it, decades. The entire accumulated history of two people raised in the same difficult house by the same difficult circumstances. And it was too complex to name and too specific to describe, but it was real, and it was theirs, and she felt it somewhere below the level of the current anger. She looked away first. What do we do about Reeves? She said to Min Jae. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him working through it, not performing thought, but actually doing it. And what he arrived at tightened something around his eyes. I need to make a call first, he said. Before we decide anything, there's someone who has a better read on Reeves's current position than I do. He looked at Chaewon in the doorway. Chaewon already had his phone out. Something passed between them. Not a word, not a gesture, but the shorthand of two people who have worked in close proximity long enough that communication had gone partially nonverbal. Who are you calling? She asked. A man who has been in this city longer than I have and knows where the real walls are. He moved toward the hallway, slightly away from the room, the instinctive privacy of someone who needed to have a conversation without an audience. I'll be a few minutes. He went into the hallway. She could hear him on the phone almost immediately. Korean again, but slower this time, with a different cadence, not the logistics rhythm from before. This was the rhythm of careful speech between people who have a long history and are navigating something delicate. She sat in the armchair and looked at her father and her brother and the muted TV and the takeout containers on the coffee table, and she thought about what Min Jae had said. It looks like a campaign. And she thought about the night before, the SUV, the conference room. Sung's voice through the door at 3:47 in the morning. You made a statement this morning, whether you meant to or not. And she thought about herself, Amani Brooks, 23 years old, diner waitress, $11 an hour, sitting in the armchair of her father's house as the reason why one of the most powerful men in the city was on the phone in the hallway trying to determine whether he had inadvertently started a war. The thought was so large it didn't quite fit inside a normal feeling. She held it at arm's length and looked at it. Her father moved. He crossed the room slowly and sat in the other chair, the one angled toward her, and he put his coffee cup down on the end table and folded his hands in his lap and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him in a very long time. Maybe not since she was a child, before things got bad. It was the expression of a man trying to actually see his daughter, not manage her, or defend himself, or explain himself, just actually see her. "Does it hurt?" he said. He meant her arm. The bruises she'd pulled her sleeve over before she knocked. "Yes," she said. He looked at his own hands. "I know I can't—" He stopped. "There isn't a way to say sorry for that means anything." "No," she agreed, "but I am." "I know, Dad." And she did know, which was part of the weight of it. She had never doubted that he loved her, had never been able to file him away as simply a bad man, because he wasn't simply anything. He was a man who loved her, and had hurt her, and had failed her in ways that were real and documented, and would not be wished away. And all of those things were true simultaneously, and there was no way to make them add up neatly. Min-jae came back into the room. His face was different, not visibly, not in any way her father or Darius would have caught, but she had been studying his expressions for 12 hours, and she caught it. Something had landed in the phone call that he had not been expecting, and he was managing it now, containing it behind his composure. "What?" she said immediately. He looked at her, then at her father and Darius, and something in the quality of that look made her stomach go cold. "I need to talk to you alone," he said. She stood. "Tell me." "Amani, tell me," she said. "Whatever it is." He held her gaze for a moment, and then he made a decision. She could see it, the precise second of it, and he said, "Reeves wasn't operating alone on your family's debt." The room didn't change. Same muted TV, same takeout containers, same broken light in the ceiling fixture her father had been meaning to fix since last spring. But something happened in the quality of her attention, a kind of sharpening that made everything slightly more visible. "What does that mean?" she said. "The man I called has been watching Reeves for a long time. He told me something I didn't have before." Min-jae's voice was careful, deliberate. "The debt your father ran up, the original amount, the loan he took from Reeves, it wasn't random. Reeves didn't find your father. Your father was referred." "Referred," she said. "Sent to Reeves specifically, by someone who knew Reeves's methods. Someone who understood that Reeves's debts don't resolve with money, that they resolve with leverage. Someone who wanted your family in debt to Reeves for a reason." He paused. "My contact sent me documentation 20 minutes ago. The referral was logged. Reeves's people keep records, meticulous records, because the records are part of the leverage. And the referral is in there." She was aware of absolute stillness in the room. Her father had stopped breathing in any visible way. "Who referred him?" she said. Min-jae looked at her, and in his face was the specific kind of steadiness a person manufactures when they are about to say something that will hurt someone they do not want to hurt. "The Black Serpents," he said. "Park's man specifically. 8 months ago, before the Serpents had a direct claim on your family, they sent your father to Reeves to create a secondary trap." He let that settle. "The Serpents and Reeves have a working arrangement. When the Serpents want someone buried deeply enough that there's no exit, they funnel them to Reeves first, create a debt that can't be resolved normally. Then, when the person is desperate enough, the Serpents come in with their own offer." He paused. "Your father's debt to the Serpents and his debt to Reeves weren't two separate problems. They were one plan." She heard her father make a sound. She did not look at him. She was looking at Min-jae. "Which means," she said slowly, "when I walked out of that warehouse this morning with Park's contract—" "Reeves already knew," Min-jae said. "My contact is certain. The moment I sat down at that table, Park would have contacted Reeves. Reeves knows someone cleared the Serpent's claim. Reeves knows about you, and Reeves knows about me." He held her gaze. "This was never two debts, Amani. It was a system designed to make sure there was no way out. And when someone found a way out of the first part, the second part activated." She sat back down on the arm of the chair, not because her legs gave out, they didn't, but because she needed a moment to let the full architecture of it come into view, the whole structure, the long, deliberate planning of two men working in concert to build a cage around a family, her family, and the specific cold horror of understanding that the cage had never had just one door. $42,000, she said. That's what they told your father. That's not what Reeves will say today. What will he say today? Min Jae's jaw set. He'll say the debt has been reclassified. Because someone with my profile intervening in his arrangement constitutes interference, which triggers a penalty clause in his contracts. Standard language, unilateral, his own terms. The penalty doubles the principal. He paused. Your family now owes Reeves $84,000. And climbing. The silence that came after that was the longest silence of the morning. Darius made a noise that was not quite a word. Her father had both hands over his mouth. The muted television threw shifting light across all of them, and nobody said anything for a long time. And she sat on the arm of the chair and felt the envelope against her ribs. The paper contract. The thing she had carried out of that warehouse believing it was the end of something when it had been the midpoint all along. Min Jae said carefully, "There is something I need to tell you. Before we decide how to move forward." She looked up. Going after Reeves, the way we'd have to do it, with enough force to make him walk away, will not be quiet. His voice was very even. I told you this morning that moving against 2 operations in 24 hours would look like a campaign. What I didn't tell you is what that means for me specifically. There are men in this city who have been watching me for years, waiting for a moment when I extend beyond my territory in a way that creates grounds for response. He paused. If I go after Reeves, I give them that moment. She understood what he was saying, not abstractly, concretely, the specific human weight of it. He was telling her that if he helped her family again today, he would be handing his enemies a justification, that this was not just complicated, as he'd said before, but potentially lethal, not for her, but for him. And he was telling her this not as a reason to stop, but as information, so she could decide with both eyes open. She looked at the man in the charcoal suit sitting in her father's living room, in a house with a broken porch step and takeout on the coffee table, and she thought about a stranger in a booth who had said please and meant it, who had paid $87,000 for a woman he'd met 2 hours earlier, who had come into this house and sat with her family and translated a nightmare into something she could look at directly. She thought about what it cost him, and she thought about what it would cost her to walk away from it and leave the cage intact. "What do you need from me?" she said, "to do this?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I need you to understand that when we walk out of this house and go toward Reeves, we are past the point where any of this stays contained," he said. "What comes after, the response, whatever form it takes, you will be in the middle of it. Not in danger, I will make sure of that, but present, visible. Your name will be attached to this." "My name was already on a contract I never signed," she said. "I'm done being named without my permission." She stood all the way up, off the arm of the chair, to her full height. "I'm doing this with you, or I'm doing it some other way, but I'm not walking away from it." She looked at her father, at Darius. "We're not walking away from it." Her father looked up at her from the depths of whatever he was sitting in. Something in his face, for the first time since she'd arrived, for possibly the first time in years, resembled the man she had a dim child's memory of, someone who stood up. "Tell us what to do," he said to Min Jae. Min Jae stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the 3 of them, Amani, and her father, and her brother, in the cluttered living room of a house on Garfield, and she could see him making decisions, ordering them, finding the shape of the next several hours. "Chaewon," he said toward the door. Chaewon appeared in the doorway. "Call Sung. Tell him we're moving against the Reeves position today." A pause. "Tell him to bring everyone?" Chaewon looked at him for a half-second, a very specific half-second, the kind that said you're certain, and Min Jae held the look without wavering, and Chaewon nodded and disappeared with his phone already at his ear. Min Jae looked at Amani. "Stay close," he said. She was already reaching for her jacket. She didn't have a jacket. She had reached for it and then remembered she didn't have one. She was still in her diner uniform, the white shirt with the small grease stain above the second button that Felix had told her would come out with club soda and never did, and her coat was in her apartment, which she had not been to since yesterday morning. She stood in the middle of her father's living room with her hand extended toward nothing and felt the specific absurdity of that, the whole weight of the morning pressing down, and here she was reaching for a coat that wasn't there. Her father said, "Wait," and disappeared up the stairs. He came back with her mother's cardigan, dark green, wool, the kind of garment that had been washed so many times it had gone soft in a way that only decades produce. She looked at it in his hands. "She'd want you to have something warm," he said. She took it. She put it on without speaking. It was too big. Her mother had been taller, and the sleeves came down past her wrists and covered the bruises entirely, and she pushed the sleeves up to the elbow and buttoned the two middle buttons and felt something move through her chest that she did not examine closely because she didn't have time for it. "Lock the doors," she said to her father. "Don't open them for anyone until I call you." "Amani." "Dad." She looked at him. "Please." He nodded. She looked at Darius, who was standing now, hands at his sides, looking at her with an expression she had no category for. Not quite remorse, not quite resolve, somewhere in the territory where those two things border each other. "You stay with him," she said. "Let me come." "No." She was already at the door. "You've done enough. Stay with Dad." She didn't wait for his answer. Outside, the morning had gone overcast, the thin winter light pressing flat and gray against everything. Chewan was already in the passenger seat. She got in beside Minjae in the back, and the door was barely shut when the SUV moved. "How long?" she said. "Sung needs 40 minutes to assemble the full group. We're meeting at the Crane Street garage." Minjae was looking at his phone, reading something, his thumb moving. "Reeves operates out of a building on North Halstead. Legitimate face, commercial property management on the upper floors, his actual operation in the lower two. He has security." "How many?" "Typically 6 to 8 in the building. More if he's been warned." He looked up from the phone. "He's been warned." "How do you know?" "Because Park is efficient, and it's been 2 hours." He pocketed the phone. "There will be more." She absorbed this. "When you say Sung is bringing everyone, 14 men, plus Chewan and Mina." She looked at him. "Is that enough?" "It's enough," he said, and the way he said it told her he'd already run this calculation multiple times, and had arrived at the same answer, and the answer was barely. But he was not going to say barely, because barely was the truth, and the truth right now needed to be managed. "What do you need me to do?" she said. He looked at her then, and she saw it again. That flicker, that thing that moved through his composure when he looked at her directly. "Not get hurt," he said. "That's not a role. It's the most important one." "Minjae." She kept her voice level. "I'm not sitting in a car while you walk into a building full of armed men because of my family's debt. Tell me what I can actually do." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Not long, but the kind of 3 seconds that contain a real decision. "There's a secondary issue," he said. "The documentation Reeves holds on your family. The loan agreements, the penalty clauses, the referral record from the Serpents. That's physical. He keeps originals in the building." Chewan confirmed the location. "Where?" "Second floor office, east side. The man at his desk is named Cole. Mid-40s, not security. He's an accountant. He manages the ledgers. If we can get to Cole before Reeves's security locks down the second floor, Cole can access the files. And if we can't, then Reeves still has paper on your family after tonight, and paper is how he operates." He met her eyes. "The physical files matter. How do we get to Cole?" "The building has a service entrance on the east side, separate from the main lobby. It's used for maintenance. Reeves's security watches the lobby and the street-level windows. The service entrance is lower priority because it's not an obvious point of entry." A pause. "Jaewon can get you in through the service door. You'd have a window, maybe 3 minutes before security realizes the lobby breach and redirects." "And Jaewon stays with me?" "Yes." No hesitation. Every second. She looked at Chaewon's profile in the front seat, the scar through his eyebrow, the careful, complete stillness of him. "Chaewon," she said. "I heard," he said. "Have you done this kind of thing before?" "Yes." "Does it go wrong?" A pause. Sometimes. What do you do when it goes wrong? Adapt, he said, and keep moving. She sat back. Out the window, the city was doing its normal morning things. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, two kids in school uniforms pushing each other on a corner in the way of kids who are performing toughness for each other. The ordinary texture of a day that didn't know it was happening alongside something else entirely. Okay, she said. The Crane Street garage was dim and smelled like oil and concrete cold. 3 black vehicles were already there when they arrived, men standing in configurations that suggested briefings already in progress. Sung was a man in his 60s, she discovered, white-haired, built like a retired boxer, wearing a gray coat and no expression whatsoever. He looked at Min-jae when they arrived, and then, very briefly, at Amani, with the specific assessment of someone filing information away. They've added men, Sung said, without preamble. 2 additional vehicles outside the building in the last hour. How many total? Min-jae said. We count 14 in or around the building. Reeves himself is confirmed inside. He didn't run, which either means he's confident or he wants the confrontation. He wants the confrontation, Min-jae said. That's my read too. Then we give it to him. Min-jae looked at the men assembled. She counted quickly, 12 visible. And something shifted in him. A gear change, subtle but complete. The quality of his stillness became something else. The stillness not of a man containing himself, but of a man who had released the containment. It wasn't loud. There was no speech. He just looked at his men, and they looked back at him, and some current passed between them that she felt the edges of without being able to name it. Service entrance team goes in 60 seconds before the lobby. Chaewon has the east side. The objective inside is Reeves, Cole, and the second floor records. In that order of priority. Nobody moves on Reeves until I'm in the room. He paused. Sung. Here. You're with me. Sung nodded. Min-jae looked at Amani. Stay with Chaewon, he said. Don't separate from him for any reason. If he tells you to stop, you stop. If he tells you to run, you run toward the vehicle, not away from the building. The vehicles will be repositioned by then. Got it. Amani. I said, I've got it. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The shape that would be there if the situation allowed for smiling. I know you do, he said, and moved away toward Sung. She stood for a moment in the dim of the garage and breathed the cold oil smell and pulled the cardigan tighter around herself and felt the paper envelope still in her uniform pocket, still there, still pressing. Chaewon appeared at her elbow. Ready? He said. No, she said. Let's go. They went in Chaewon's vehicle, a separate car from the convoy. Less visible, he explained without being asked. A sedan rather than an SUV, the kind of car that didn't announce itself on a north side street at 10 in the morning. He drove at normal speed, normal gaps, everything calibrated to unremarkable. She sat in the passenger seat and watched his hands on the wheel and thought about 3 minutes. Tell me about Cole, she said. Mid-40s. Has worked for Reeves for 11 years. Not physically dangerous. He's administrative. But he's loyal because Reeves has documentation on him too. He won't cooperate easily. What kind of documentation? Financial crimes? Going back 8 years? Reeves has the originals. Cole knows if he ever causes trouble, those files go to the wrong people. She processed this. So Reeves collects leverage on everyone, not just debtors. That's his model, Chaewon said. It's elegant, in a specific way. Everyone around him is compromised. It creates a closed system. How do we get Cole to give us the files if he won't cooperate? Chaewon glanced at her. We tell him the system is ending today regardless, that cooperating gives him a chance at what Reeves can't give him anymore. Which is a way out. She turned this over. Does he get that? Actually? Chaewon was quiet for a moment. Min-jae doesn't make promises he doesn't keep, he said. It was the most words he'd used in a single statement since she'd met him. She believed him. She filed it. The building on North Halsted was a converted industrial space, 6 stories, the lower half brick, and the upper glass and steel in the way of a renovation that had tried to bridge two eras and half succeeded. The commercial property management signage was visible from half a block away. Clean, professional, deliberate. The face of something legitimate. Kaiwan drove past it once. She looked. Two men outside the main entrance, visible, but not aggressive. The professional performance of security that wasn't trying to look like security. A third man near the corner who was checking his phone in the specific way of someone whose job is watching and is pretending not to. "They know we're coming," she said. "Yes." He turned the corner. The service entrance was mid-block on the east side. A metal door set back from the street, no signage, a delivery ramp beside it. "When we go through that door, we have 90 seconds before the lobby breach. The noise from the front will redirect attention. We use the noise." "What kind of noise?" He looked at her. "Right," she said. "I don't want to know." "Probably better." He parked the sedan a half block back. They got out. She fell in beside him on the sidewalk, and they walked at a pace that was deliberate without being hurried. And she kept her eyes forward and her hands loose at her sides, and she was aware of her own heartbeat in a very specific way. Not pounding, not racing, just present, audible to her in a way it usually wasn't, each beat a small, distinct thud. At the service door, Haewon produced a key card from his jacket. She had time to wonder how he had it, and then the door clicked open and she stopped wondering, and they were inside. The service corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, the kind of utilitarian space that exists in every building and that nobody who works in the building ever consciously sees. Concrete floor, exposed pipes overhead, the smell of cleaning product and something mechanical. Chaewon moved fast and quiet, and she matched him step for step, and they were at the stairwell door in 11 seconds. Second floor. She counted the stairs. 1 flight, 14 steps. Her hand found the railing and released it before she'd realized she'd grabbed it. The door at the top opened onto a hallway, carpeted. Framed prints on the wall, the generic kind. 3 doors visible. Chaewon went left without hesitation, and she followed, and they were 6 steps down the hall when the sound came from below. Not an explosion, closer to a pressure release, a sound that suggested sudden rapid movement of many people through a space not designed for it. Voices in hard surfaces, something that thudded once against the floor, and then the quality of the building changed entirely, the way a body changes when adrenaline arrives, everything suddenly harder and more awake. Chaewon didn't slow down. The east side office was the 3rd door. He didn't knock. He opened it. The man at the desk was Cole. She recognized him from the description. Mid-40s, unremarkable face, the posture of someone who has spent a decade folding himself small. He was already standing when the door opened, already reaching for something on the desk. A phone. And Chaewon crossed the room in 4 steps and put his hand flat on the phone before Cole's fingers reached it. "Sit down," Chaewon said. Cole sat. She came into the room and shut the door and stood with her back against it and looked at the space. Filing cabinets, a desk, a laptop, shelves of binders. The specific organized density of a man who manages other people's secrets for a living. "You're looking for files," Cole said. His voice was thin. "Brooks, Henry Brooks and the associated contract." She hadn't expected him to open with that. "Yes," she said. "And the Serpent referral documentation." "Yes." Cole looked at her for a moment. His face was doing something complicated. Layers of calculation moving behind eyes that were more intelligent than his position suggested. He looked at Jaewon's hand still resting near the phone. Looked at the door. "Is Reeves going to walk out of this building today?" Cole said. Chaewon said nothing. It was its own answer. Cole sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, removed a key, and stood and crossed to the furthest filing cabinet. He unlocked it. He began pulling files with the quick efficiency of a man who has known where everything is for years and has perhaps imagined doing this exact thing before without ever believing he'd have occasion. She crossed the room and stood beside him and looked at the files he was pulling. Her father's name, dates, figures. The referral document from Park's operation. She recognized the Serpent's logo, crude black serpent on a white header, and below it the penalty clause documentation and the compound interest calculations and all the paperwork of a system designed to make escape impossible. She took the files as Cole handed them to her. Her hands were steady. She was mildly surprised by this. "There's a secondary file," Cole said, without looking at her. "Reeves's arrangement with the Serpents covers more than your family. There are 17 active contracts in this system. Same structure. Serpents refer. Reeves traps. Leverage accumulates." He paused. "If you're going to end this, end it completely." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" He removed another folder, thicker, older. "Because I've been managing these files for 11 years, he said, "and I have daughters." He set the folder on top of the others in her arms. "Take it." She took it. Below, something happened that was louder than what had come before, a sound of impact. Then voices she couldn't make out through the floor, then a sustained silence that was almost worse than the noise. Heywan's phone vibrated. He looked at it. "We need to move," he said to her. "Where?" "Down. Min Jae has Reeves." They went back into the hallway. The building felt different now. The particular quality of a place where something has been decided, the atmosphere after a pressure change. They went down the service stairs and through the service corridor, and at the door to the main space, Chae-won stopped and looked at her. "Stay behind me," he said, "no matter what you see." She nodded. He opened the door. The lobby of Reeves' building had been rearranged by the last 15 minutes. 4 of Reeves' security men were on the floor, not moving, not visibly injured badly, the particular stillness of people who have been efficiently controlled rather than hurt, zip-tied at the wrists. 2 of Min Jae's men were positioned at the exterior doors. Mina was at the reception desk, going through something on the computer there with the focused intensity of a woman who does not waste time. Sung was in the middle of the lobby, standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at nothing in particular in the specific way of a man maintaining perimeter. Min Jae was not in the lobby. "Where?" she said to Sung. "Ground floor back office," Sung said. "Don't go in yet." "Why?" "Because he hasn't finished." She stood in the lobby with the files pressed against her chest inside her mother's cardigan and listened. She could hear voices from the back, not the words, just the tones. One voice steady and low. One voice that started controlled and was losing control by increments. Reeves. She had not yet seen him, and she could already hear in his voice the specific quality of a man whose entire life has been built on being the one who holds the leverage, encountering for the first time someone who simply doesn't care about it. One of Min Jae's men, she didn't know his name, came and stood near her without speaking, which she understood was positioning, and she let him, because her job right now was to hold the files and stay out of the way, and she was going to do her job. 3 minutes passed. 4. The voices from the back office rose once. Reeves's voice, something cracking in it, not quite shouting but at the upper edge of controlled speech, and then went quiet. And then there was only one voice, low and continuous, and then silence. Min Jae came out. His coat was unmarked. His face was composed. He was carrying nothing. He walked toward her across the lobby, and she looked at him and tried to read what had happened in the back office, and what she found in his expression was not satisfaction exactly, more like completion, the specific quality of a finished thing. "Is he—" she started. "Alive," Min Jae said, and aware of his situation. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," he said, "which is that the documentation Cole just handed you is the foundation of everything he has. Without the originals, without the paper, his leverage doesn't exist. He can reconstruct some of it, eventually, but the window to do it will be closed." "How do you close the window?" He looked at the files in her arms. "We make sure the people in those files know what was done to them. When 17 families understand the structure, how they were referred, how the penalties were designed, how the whole thing was coordinated with the Serpents, they have grounds, legal grounds. Reeves loses his insulation because the insulation was built on their silence. You're going to tell them." "We are." He said it quietly. "If you're willing to be part of that." She looked at the folder Cole had added, the thick one, 17 contracts. She thought about Cole saying, "I have daughters," in the voice of a man who had been waiting 11 years to say something. "Yes," she said. Something moved in his face. That degree of warmth again, that precise single degree. "Good," he said. Chewan appeared at Min Jae's shoulder. "We need to leave. Park's people have been monitoring. They'll know by now that the Reeves operation is compromised. If they move to recover the Serpent's referral documentation before we're out, we have it," Min Jae said, glancing at the files. "They don't know that yet, but they will." "Then we go." He looked at Amani. "Stay close." They were at the door when her phone rang. She had almost forgotten she had it. It had been in her uniform pocket, dead weight, all morning. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She looked at it. "Don't answer," Chewan said. She answered. A voice she didn't recognize, male, flat, with the particular tonelessness of someone reading from a script or suppressing affect deliberately. "Miss Brooks," it said, "I want you to know that your father is fine. Right now, he's fine." Her heart stopped. Not metaphorically. She felt the actual hitch in her chest, the skip, the terrible pause before the next beat arrived. "Right now," the voice said again, with the careful emphasis of someone making sure she understood the structure of the sentence. She looked at Min Jae. His eyes had gone to her face the moment she answered, and whatever he saw there made him stop moving entirely. "Who is this?" she said. "Mr. Park has a concern," the voice said, "about the documentation you're currently carrying. He'd like to discuss a resolution." A pause. "Your father's address is 1147 South Garfield. We're parked outside." The call ended. She stood in the doorway of Reeves's building with the phone in her hand and the files against her chest and her mother's cardigan too big around her shoulders, and she felt something happen in her body that was not fear and not rage, but the combination of the two that exists past both of them. The cold, grinding, absolute clarity of a person who has been maneuvered into a corner and knows it, and is done, pretending there is another option. "Park," she said. Min Jae's hand was already on his phone. "They're at my father's house," she said. "Right now." He was already moving, already talking, to Sung, sharp, fast Korean, and Sung was moving too, and the whole lobby reorganized in 10 seconds. The specific efficiency of people who know exactly what to do when the board changes. "Get in the car," Min Jae said to her. Not commanding, presenting the only available fact. She was already running. The sedan was half a block away and she covered it in less than she thought she could, and Jae-won was behind her and Min Jae came last, and the engine was running before the doors were all closed, and she was pressing her back against the seat with the files still against her chest, and the phone still in her hand, and her heart was doing something she could feel in her throat, each beat distinct and hard. "How long ago did they arrive at the house?" Jae-won said. "The call just ended." "Sung's man on the house." Min Jae was on his phone already. He spoke, listened. His jaw went very tight. He ended the call. She looked at him. "What?" "Sung's man is down," he said. "They took him out before they called you. They've been in position for at least 20 minutes. He was looking straight ahead at the road, at the route, calculating. "Park planned this from the warehouse. He let us walk out and waited to see where we went. He knew about the files. He needed to know we had them before he moved. Confirming we went to Reeves's building was his signal." A pause. "He's been ahead of us for the last 2 hours." She thought about Park's face in the warehouse, the heavy-set man in the expensive tracksuit who had looked at her like a line item and had taken Min Jae's money and let them walk because he already had the next move in place. She thought about that small smile when Min Jae called it the matter of your contract. He had known. He'd taken the 90,000 and voided the contract and watched them leave, and he'd already had his people positioning at her father's house because the contract was never the point. Min Jae had said it. The serpents and Reeves were one system, and the files in her arms were the key to that system, and Park was not going to let those files leave the city intact. "How many does he have there?" she said. "Unknown." "Enough. And my father and Darius are inside." "Yes." "You told them to lock the doors." "Locked doors don't." He stopped himself, rephrased. "It buys time." Not much. She looked at the files. 17 contracts, plus her family's documentation, plus the Serpent's referral records. Everything Park needed to recover. Everything she needed to end it. If we give him the files, she said. We don't give him the files. I'm thinking out loud. If we give him the files, your family's debt reestablishes, the 17 other families remain trapped, and Park knows he can use hostages against me, which means he does it again the next time he needs leverage. Min-jae's voice was completely level. It was the most frightening thing about it. So we don't give him the files. Then we go in. Yes. With what we have. He looked at her then, briefly, while Jae-won drove. Sung has 4 men still mobile plus what's in this car. Park will have planned for a response. He knows my team size. He was counting vehicles at the warehouse. He'll have enough to make it cost us. A pause. It will cost us. But you're going. Yes. Why? She needed to hear him say it. Not for the files. Why? He looked at the road. A full 3 seconds. Because your father is in that house, he said. And I told you I would make sure no shadow from my world reached yours. And I was too late to keep that promise. And the only thing left to do with a broken promise is go fix it. She turned to face forward. Her hands had stopped shaking. She didn't know when. Tell me exactly what we're driving into, she said. A narrow residential street, single entry point from the south. Park's vehicles will be blocking the north end. He'll have men at the front and back of the house. He doesn't know about the side entrance through the gangway. There's a side entrance? There's a gangway between your father's house and the neighbor's fence. It comes out at the back. Does your brother know it? She thought. Yes, we used to. When we were kids and we stayed out past curfew, we'd come in through the back window off the gangway so Dad wouldn't hear the front door. Does Park's people know about it? How would they? They wouldn't, Min-jae said, unless your brother told them, and there's no reason he would. He glanced at Jae-won. Jae-won goes through the gangway, gets to Darius, gets them moving toward the back of the house, away from the front. And us? We come through the front. He paused, loudly. She understood what that meant. The front was the distraction. Jae-won and the files and her family coming out the back was the objective. The front was where the cost would be. You'd do that, she said. Yes. That's... She stopped. That's dangerous for you. Yes, he said again, with the same directness he'd had since Booth 6, the same absolute absence of performance. It is. She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead, his profile in the flat winter light, and she thought about 12 hours ago when she'd sat across from a stranger in a diner and told the truth because she was too tired to do anything else. And she thought about everything that had assembled itself from that single tired truth. And she felt something in her chest that she did not yet have the vocabulary for, but that she knew she would need to name eventually. Not now. Okay, she said, tell me exactly where to stand. Jae-won turned onto Garfield 2 blocks north of the house and stopped. Through the windshield at the end of the block, she could see 2 dark vehicles parked at angles that were not parked car angles, the specific geometry of blockade. 4 men visible on the street outside her father's house. Possibly more she couldn't see. Her brother's face in the window, 2nd floor. She caught it, a pale shape, and then it was gone. And she didn't know if he'd seen them or if the pale shape had been something else. Min-jae's hand touched her forearm, just briefly, just once. Through her mother's cardigan, she felt the warmth of it, and then it was gone. Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, he said, stay behind the vehicle until Jae-won signals from the gangway. Then you run. You run for the back of the house and you do not look back at the street. And you, she said. He was already getting out of the car. She watched his back as he moved into the cold morning air, Sung materializing from somewhere beside him, and the 2 of them walking toward the blockade at the end of the block with the calm, absolute certainty of men who had calculated the cost and had decided to pay it. And she sat in the car with the files against her chest and her hand on the door handle, and she felt the moment arriving the way you feel a wave before it reaches you. The displacement of air, the change in pressure, the absolute knowledge that in approximately 3 seconds everything was going to be very loud and very fast, and there would be no time left for anything except what she did with her body right now, in this moment, before the wave. Chaewon's hand was on her shoulder. "Ready," he said. Not a question. She opened the door. The wave hit before she was fully out of the car. Not a wave, that was the wrong word for it. Too clean, too singular. What happened at the end of Garfield Street in the flat gray of that winter morning was more like a detonation of intention. Min Jae and Sung walking toward Park's blockade with the particular momentum of men who had decided the accounting was done, and Park's men reading it, and everything that had been coiled and waiting in the last 24 hours finally releasing all at once. She heard it before she saw it. Voices, impact, the hard, short sounds of a confrontation that had moved past its opening move. And then Chaewon's hand was on her arm and they were moving, not toward the street but parallel to it, cutting through the narrow gap between houses that ran along the side of the block. And she was running in her diner uniform and her mother's cardigan with 17 families' worth of documentation pressed against her ribs, and her breath coming in visible clouds in the cold air. The gangway between her father's house and the neighbor's fence was exactly as she remembered it, barely wide enough for a grown person, overgrown at the edges, the fence on one side and the brick of the house on the other with a gap of maybe 30 inches. She had come through here at 17, at 16, at 15, in the dark, moving quiet so her father didn't hear. She knew every inch of it. She went through it faster than Chaewon, and he was right behind her, and neither of them spoke. The backyard was small and cluttered. Her father had never been a yard person, had always meant to do something with it, and never had, so it was mostly dead grass and a rusted metal chair and a garden hose still coiled on its hook from last fall. There was a man in the yard, one of Park's, standing at the back corner of the house, facing the fence at the far end, watching the alley. He had not heard them come through the gangway because the noise from the street was loud enough now to cover it. Chaewon did not hesitate. He covered the distance in 4 steps, and his arm went around the man's neck from behind, and the man grabbed at the arm, and his knees went, and the whole sequence took 6 seconds and produced almost no sound. And then Chaewon was lowering him to the dead grass with a carefulness that was purely practical. A falling body makes noise, a controlled descent doesn't, and she was already at the back door. She tried the handle, locked. She knocked. 2 short, 1 long. The code she and Darius had used as children for "it's us, it's safe." And she had not thought about whether he would remember it. It had come out of her hands instinctively, pure muscle memory from 20 years back. The lock clicked. Darius opened the door. His face was the color of bad news, and he was gripping the door frame with one hand like he needed it to stay upright. And when he saw her, something in him collapsed and rebuilt simultaneously, a very fast demolition and construction happening behind his eyes. "Money? Where's Dad?" "Kitchen. He's okay. She was already past him, through the back hall, past the basement door she'd fallen down at age 9, around the corner into the kitchen where her father was sitting at the table with both hands flat on the surface, and a cut above his left eye that was bleeding slowly down the side of his face in a thin red line. She stopped. "Dad." "I'm fine," he said immediately, the automatic response of a man who has said "I'm fine" through worse things and means it as information rather than reassurance. "Your head." One of them hit the door when they pushed it. I was behind it. He touched the cut with 2 fingers and looked at the blood on them with mild assessment. "It's not deep." She crossed the kitchen and found a dish towel hanging from the oven handle. Yellow, faded, had been there since her mother bought it, and folded it and pressed it gently to the cut. Her father's hand came up and covered hers, and then he was holding the towel himself, and she was standing in front of him, and they were looking at each other in the kitchen where she had grown up, and she thought, this is going to be the last time this kitchen is the thing it used to be, and I think that might be okay. K1 came in from the back hall. "We need to move them," he said to her. "Away from the windows. The front of the house is still active." She could hear it. The street sounds, voices, and movement, the particular acoustic texture of a confrontation that had not fully resolved. She helped her father up, his hand on her arm, and Darius took his other side without being asked, and they moved through the kitchen into the hallway and then into the bathroom. No windows, interior wall, the safest room in the house. And her father sat on the edge of the tub and pressed the dish towel to his head, and looked at Darius and said nothing, and Darius looked at the floor, And the three of them were in a bathroom together in a way that they had not been since Amani was small enough to need bathing, and the geometry of it was so strange she almost laughed. She didn't. She turned to Chaewon in the doorway. "Min-jae," she said, "I know." He already had his phone out. He tried it, looked at the screen, tried again. Interference, or he can't answer. What does that mean? It means I need to get eyes on the street. He looked at her. "You stay here." "Chaewon, you stay here," he said. And it was not the tone of a man giving orders. It was the tone of a man describing the one configuration of events that let him do his job, and she recognized the difference. If something is wrong out there, you are not going to fix it by going out there. What you can do is keep them, he nodded toward the bathroom. In this room until I come back. She looked at him. 3 minutes, he said. You said that at Reeves's building. I was right then too, he said, and then he was gone back through the house toward the front, moving quietly in the way that was apparently simply how he moved through the world. She turned back to the bathroom. Her father had the dish towel pressed firmly to the cut and was looking at her with an expression she recognized from a very specific period of her childhood, age 7, 8, when she had still been small enough that her father's face had been her primary map of whether the world was okay. He had that face now, the face he used to make when she was sick or scared, the face that said, I see you in a language that had nothing to do with words. You did all this, he said. I didn't do it alone. The man, Min-jae. Yes. He's out there now. Yes, she said. Her father was quiet for a moment. The towel had slowed the bleeding. Who is he, really? He said. She thought about how to answer that. Thought about everything she knew, which was assembled from 12 hours of close proximity and crisis, which was not enough time to know anyone and yet was sometimes exactly enough. He's someone who helped us, she said. He didn't have to. He chose to. People like that, her father stopped, tried again. Men like that don't do things without reasons. His reason was that he could, she said, and that he wanted to. And that's more than most people offer. Her father looked at Darius. Darius was still looking at the floor. The bathroom was small enough that his shoulder was almost touching hers, and she could feel the tension in him, the specific physical quality of a person holding themselves together through jaw and posture. Darius, her father said. Darius looked up. Look at your sister. He looked at her. His eyes were wet in a way he was not going to acknowledge and she was not going to point out. He looked at her the way he used to look at her when they were children and something had gone badly wrong, and she was the one who knew what to do about it, which had not been her job but had become it by accumulation. I'm sorry, he said. The third time he'd said it in the last hour, and this time it sounded different, stripped of the self-protective layer, the I have reasons underneath layer, stripped down to just the thing itself, the raw, simple weight of it. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I know what I did, not just that it was wrong. I know what it was. She looked at her brother. She had been running on adrenaline and forward motion for so long that this moment, stationary, in a bathroom, with nowhere to run and nothing to do except be in it, felt almost unbearable in a way that had nothing to do with threat. It was the unbearability of love that has been badly damaged and hasn't stopped being love. That specific grief. She had no idea what to do with it. I know you know, she said. I don't know what that means for us yet. I don't know if there is an us yet after this. She kept her voice even, not because she didn't feel anything, but because feeling everything at once produced a kind of interference that she couldn't afford right now. But I know you know, okay? He nodded, looked at his hands. The sounds from the front of the house had changed. She registered it, a shift in the street acoustic, the absence of a particular kind of active noise. Not silence exactly, but resolution. The sound of something finished rather than something ongoing. Chaewon appeared in the bathroom doorway. She looked at his face. He had the flat, post-event expression of a man who has assessed a situation and formed conclusions and is now delivering them. It's done, he said. Min-jae, she said. He's asking for you. She was moving before the sentence was completed, past Jaewon in the doorway, and through the hall and out the front door onto the porch, and down the broken step and onto the sidewalk of Garfield Street. The street had been rearranged. Park's vehicles were still there, but the men who had been standing outside them were not standing anymore. Two on the ground, conscious, one sitting against the curb holding his arm, one being walked to the side by Sung's men. Three of Min Jae's team were visible, stationed at intervals, the post-battle positioning of people maintaining control of a space they've taken. Neighbors had appeared in windows and doorways and then retreated as whatever instinct keeps you alive in a city like this told them to go back inside. Min Jae was at the far end of the block, near Park's lead vehicle. She saw him before she saw that he was hurt. He was standing. That was the first thing. He was upright, and she let that fact land and then moved past it, and then she saw the way he was standing, the specific quality of it, the controlled bearing of a person managing pain through posture. His left hand was pressed to his side beneath his coat. The coat had a tear she could see from 20 feet. She crossed the distance. He heard her coming and turned, and his face was the same composed face, but with something underneath it that wasn't usually there. A transparency, a layer removed. The look of someone who has been through something physical and has not yet fully reconstructed the surface. "You're hurt," she said. "It's manageable." She looked at his hand pressed to his side. "Let me see." "Amani." "Let me see," she said, the same way she'd said, "I need you to wait outside and tell me," and every other thing she'd had to say twice that morning to get what she needed. He moved his hand. The coat had been cut. Not a bullet, she assessed with the fast practicality of someone who had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned the difference. A blade, across the lower ribs, and the shirt beneath was dark with blood in a way that was more than minor, but less than critical. And she looked at it, and looked at his face, and tried to make that calculation with the limited information she had. "We need to get you to someone," she said. "I have a doctor," he said. "I'll go. Now. When this is closed," she looked at the street, at Sung, who was on the phone, at Jaewon, who had appeared behind her, at the two men from Park's operation who were now being secured against the side of the building. "Where is Park?" she said. "In the vehicle," Min Jae said. She looked at the lead vehicle. Dark windows. She looked at Min Jae. "I want to talk to him," she said. A pause. "Amani?" "I want to talk to him." He looked at her for a moment. His hand was back at his side, pressing. 30 seconds, he said. Sung opened the rear door of the vehicle. Park was inside. The expensive tracksuit now considerably less composed, his wrist secured with something behind him, a bruise developing along his jaw that hadn't been there in the warehouse. He looked at her when the door opened with the expression of a man who has run several calculations and arrived at the same unsatisfactory answer in each one. She stood at the open door and looked at him. "You planned this from the beginning," she said. Not a question. He said nothing. "You took the money this morning knowing it didn't matter, knowing your contingency was already in place." She paused. "That was smart. It was a smart plan." Something moved in Park's face. Not quite agreement. The involuntary response of a man who has been called smart, hearing it said in a tone that is not a compliment. "Your documentation is gone," she said. "The referral records, the original contracts, the connection between your operation and Reeves, we have all of it. Copies are going to 17 families, originals are going to people who know what to do with them." She had decided this while running through the gangway, not consciously decided, just found it there, whole and formed when she needed it. Whatever you rebuild from here, you're rebuilding without the foundation. Park said, "You think this is over." "For you it is," she said, "because even if everything else comes back, the money, the operation, some version of the leverage, we both know the one thing that doesn't come back is the story. And everyone in this city who matters is going to know the story." She looked at him steadily. "That you sent a man's daughter to your own enforcer's operation because you were impatient about a debt. That's the story, and it will follow you." Park looked at her for a long moment. In his eyes, something shifted. Not defeat, not quite, but the specific revision of a man who has spent his life reading rooms and power dynamics, and who is reading this one and arriving at a conclusion he doesn't like. "You're not what I thought you were," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." She stepped back. Sung closed the door. She stood on the sidewalk of Garfield Street and exhaled slowly, and felt the adrenaline that had been carrying her since the gangway beginning its recession, the body starting to present its invoice for the last several hours. Her legs were solid. Her hands were still. She was conscious of a fine tremor somewhere deep in her muscle tissue that wasn't visible but was there. The internal vibration of someone who has been running at maximum output and is now being asked to downshift. Min-jae was beside her. "The doctor," she said. "Yes," he said. "Now." "Now," he agreed, and she heard in his voice something she hadn't heard before, a smallness of it, not weakness, but the honest diminishment of a man in pain, and she reached out without thinking and put her hand on his arm, not his injured side, his other arm, just contact, just presence, and she felt him take a breath that was slightly deeper than his previous ones had been. "Okay," he said quietly. "Now." Sung drove. She sat in the back with Min-jae, and Jae-won was in the front, and the city went past the windows in the winter morning light, and she held the files against her chest, and Min-jae sat with his hand at his side, and neither of them spoke for the first 5 minutes, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had used so many words in the last 12 hours that silence had become a different kind of communication, and she sat in it and let herself exist in it without trying to fill it. "Your father's head," he said eventually, "needs cleaning and maybe a stitch or two. He'll go to urgent care." She had texted Darius before she got in the car. Darius had texted back with 3 words, "Taking him now." And she had stared at those 3 words for a moment because they were the most functional thing her brother had done in months, and she wanted to take them at face value and didn't quite know how yet. "Will you go with them?" "After," she said. He didn't ask after what. She thought he probably knew. The doctor was a man named Han, who operated out of an unmarked clinic in a building that looked like it handled commercial printing, which it also did, on the upper floors. As a cover that had been maintained for so long, it had become functionally real. Han was 60, small, wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and greeted Min-jae with the specific exasperation of a person who has been patching this man up for years and has resigned themselves to continuing to do so. "How bad?" Han said, already helping Min-jae out of his coat. "Clean cut. Ribs took the edge of it. I don't think anything's broken." "You don't think," Han said. "I'm reporting how it feels." "Your feelings about your own injuries are famously unreliable." Han looked at Amani. "You his?" She was momentarily arrested by the question. He helped me tonight." Han assessed her with the same rapid clinical completeness he'd turned on the wound. "You need anything? You look like you've been awake for 30 hours. "I've been awake for about 22, she said. "Same advice applies." He turned back to Min-jae. "Sit." She sat in the waiting area, which was a hallway with chairs against the wall, and she held the files in her lap and looked at the floor and let herself, for the first time since the diner, not be doing anything, just sitting, just breathing. The files were heavy in a way that wasn't their physical weight. Thick folders and documents that had been used as weapons, redeployable now as something else, something that gave back rather than took. She thought about Cole saying, "I have daughters," in the office above Reeves's lobby. She thought about 17 families who didn't know yet that someone had the paper that had been used to trap them. She thought about Min-jae in the back room with Reeves, speaking in the quiet, certain voice she'd heard through the floor, and about Reeves's voice cracking at its upper edge, and about what it meant that a man who had built a system to make escape impossible had met someone for whom the system's walls were simply not relevant. She thought about Booth 6, the cherry pie. The way he'd said, "That's a good name," at the door as though noting a fact. Han came out an hour later. 3 stitches, he said. 2 ribs cracked, not broken. He'll be miserable for 2 weeks, and he'll pretend he's fine within 3 days, and I need you to enforce the 2 weeks. She blinked. He'll listen to you, Han said, with the certainty of someone who has read a situation and has not been wrong. He won't listen to me, and he won't listen to Sung, and Jae-won has given up trying. So. He looked at her over his reading glasses. 2 weeks. Light activity, no confrontations of the physical variety. He paused. Or any other variety, ideally. I'll do what I can, she said. Han looked at her for a moment. He doesn't do this, he said. Do what? Involve himself. Han picked up his glasses by the chain and turned them in his fingers. In 20 years I have known this man. He has been many things. He has been effective, and he has been ruthless, and he has been, in his way, principled. But he has never... He stopped. He has never called Sung before dawn and pulled a full operation over a woman he met in a diner. She looked at the files in her lap. He has a sister, she said. Yes, Han said. I know about the sister. A pause. That's not what this is. She didn't answer that. She didn't know how to answer it, or whether she should, or what it would mean if she did. She tucked the information somewhere she could look at later, when she had the capacity to look at things that weren't immediate. Min-jae came out 10 minutes after that. He had a clean shirt. Han kept a supply of such things, which she was not surprised by, and he was moving with the careful gait of a man whose ribs were reminding him of their existence with every step. He looked at her in the chair. You're still here, he said. Han said you need supervision. Han is excessively cautious. Han said you'd say that. She stood. The files shifted in her arms. Sit down. He sat in the chair beside hers. They were in the hallway together under the fluorescent light, and he sat with careful deliberateness and let out a slow breath that told her more about how the last hour had felt than he probably intended. Park's people will be processed, he said. Sung is handling the logistics. It will be managed without police involvement. The men who were taken out at the house, the security from Reeves's building, they'll be relocated. He paused. That's how it works. I know that's how it works, she said. He looked at her. You're not bothered by that. I'm bothered by a lot of things, she said. That's not near the top right now. She shifted the files in her lap. These need to go to someone today. I have a contact, he said. Someone outside my world, a legal aid attorney who has worked on organized crime cases. She's clean, she's competent, and she has history with the kind of documentation these are. She'll know what to do with them. 17 families, Amani said. Yes. They need to know before anything else happens. Before Park or what's left of Reeves's operation can reconfigure. Agreed, I'll call her today. She looked at him. He was sitting with his back against the wall, head slightly tilted back, the posture of a man letting gravity do some work because his body needed the rest. In this light, in this hallway, without the coat and without the performance of complete containment that pain had partially dissolved, he looked his age, neither younger nor older, just the actual age of him, with everything that went into it. Your sister, she said. In Seoul. He looked at her without surprise. Han, he said. He didn't say much, just that you have one. She paused. You don't have to. Her name is Soo Jin, he said. She's 37 now. We talk occasionally. Holidays sometimes. She has 2 daughters. He looked at the wall. What happened to her when she was 19? She recovered, in all the ways that can be measured. She married. She built something. A pause. I think she forgave me for not being there. I'm not sure I have. You're here, Amani said. Yes. You were there today. You were there last night. She looked at him. That counts. He said nothing for a moment, then, does it? Yes, she said. Simple, certain. The way he said things when he didn't need qualifying. He breathed, carefully, accommodating the ribs. Your father, he said. Darius. Urgent care by now. Dad will be fine. Darius, she paused. He did something today. Small thing. He told me he was taking Dad and did it. That's small. But small is where it starts. Do you believe he'll change? She thought about it honestly. I believe he has the capacity to, she said. Whether he uses it depends on things I can't control. She paused. I've been spending my whole life trying to manage things I can't control. I think I'm done with that. Min-jae looked at her. What does that mean for you? He said. After this. She looked at the files. I'm going to help the attorney get these to the right people. I'm going to make sure those 17 families have what they need. She paused. And then I'm going to figure out what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. The diner, he said. I can't go back to the diner. She said it and felt it land, the truth of it, the ending of something that had been her whole world a day ago. It's not bad. Felix is good people. But I can't go back to that booth and refill those cups, and I think we both know why. What did you want to be? He said. Before the diner, before everything. She looked at him. The question was so simple and so unexpectedly direct that it bypassed whatever protective layer she'd developed over the years and landed somewhere unguarded. I used to bake, she said, when I was a teenager, bread mostly, sometimes pastries. I was good at it. She heard how that sounded. That sounds small. It doesn't, he said. I had this idea once that I'd have a bakery. Small one, neighborhood place, the kind where you know people's orders. She shook her head slightly. Life got in the way. Life does that, he said. And then sometimes it stops. She looked at him. Getting in the way, he said. Sometimes it stops doing that. She sat with that for a moment. Outside in the building, she could hear the hum of the printing equipment from the upper floors, the ordinary sound of an ordinary operation that existed alongside all of this without knowing about it, and she thought about the texture of ordinary things, bread dough under her hands, the specific warmth of an oven when you open it, the way a neighborhood bakery smells at 6 a.m. before anyone else is awake, and she felt the possibility of it, not as a fantasy, but as something with weight and shape and proximity. I'm going to find a space, she said. It came out without deliberation, without the qualifying preface of someday or maybe. I'm going to find a space, and I'm going to figure out the money, and I'm going to open something. He nodded. Not with the theatrical encouragement of someone saying, yes, you should. Just a nod, absorbing it as information, the way he absorbed most things. If you need capital, he started. No, she said. He stopped. Not because I'm not grateful, she said. Not because last night didn't happen. But because if you give me money to start it, then it's built on that. And I need it to be built on something that's mine. She looked at him. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. No argument, no performance of understanding. Just yes, immediate and complete. I'll find another way, she said. Small business loan. Second job for a year. Something. She paused. I'm good at finding ways. You are, he said, and the simple factual certainty of it moved through her like warmth. They sat in the hallway for another 20 minutes. Not because there was more to say, though there was probably more to say than they had hours left in the day, but because both of them needed to sit still for a moment, inside the first quiet that had existed since a Tuesday night and a cup of coffee and a man in a booth who had said please. Chewan appeared at the end of the hall. Attorney is available, he said. If we move now, she can take the files today. Amani stood. She held the documentation, all of it, her family's papers, and the 17 contracts in Cole's secondary folder. And she looked at it one last time as a collected thing, as the physical record of a system that had been designed to be permanent and had turned out not to be. She handed it to Chewan. Make sure she gets all of it, she said, including the referral documentation. Everything. Chewan took it with both hands. He looked at her for a moment with the expressionless expression she had come to understand was his version of acknowledgement, and then he turned and went back down the hall. She looked at Minjae. He was getting to his feet with the careful management of his ribs, and she did not offer to help because she understood that he would not want that, and he got up and stood and straightened and was again the thing he was in the world, coat and composure and all of it, with only the slight stiffness of his left side to indicate anything else. I need to get to my father, she said. Yes. And you need to rest. Probably. Han's words, 2 weeks. Han is conservative by nature. Min Jae. She said his name in that way again, the complete way. I'll rest, he said. She looked at him in the hallway of a building on the north side, in the late morning light that was coming through the single window at the end of the hall, and she thought about everything she wanted to say and the impossibility of fitting it into any sentence that existed. She thought about thank you, and that wasn't it. And she thought about, you saved my life, and that was true, but also insufficient, And she thought about the man who had sat across from her in a booth and ordered cherry pie and watched her the way people watch things they're trying to understand rather than things they want something from. She said, "For what it's worth, you did that thing you couldn't do for your sister. Last night, you did it." He looked at her. "I know it's not the same," she said. "It's not her. It's not then. But you were there, and you did everything, and that matters. It doesn't undo the other thing, but it matters. I needed you to know I see that." Something happened in his face that she had not seen before and would not have been able to predict. Not the composure breaking, more like a door opening, just briefly, just enough. Something that had been held a long time being briefly allowed to be held differently. He didn't speak. He nodded, once, and the nod carried the weight of a much longer response. "Okay," she said. She went down the hall and out the building into the cold and called Darius to find out which urgent care they'd gone to. And Darius answered on the first ring and gave her the address and said, "Dad's okay, 3 stitches, they're almost done." And she stood on the sidewalk in her mother's cardigan and said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes," and ended the call and stood for one more moment in the air. The city was doing what the city always did. A bus went past. 2 women walked by arguing about something she couldn't hear. A dog on a leash investigated the base of a lamppost with total absorption, the ordinary texture of things continuing. She found a cab 2 blocks east and got in and gave the address and watched the city go past the windows. And she thought about a bakery, not as a dream, but as a project, a thing with steps and timeline and work. And she thought about what the steps might be. And the thinking was good. It was the right kind of thinking, the kind that was pointed toward rather than away from. 6 months is a long time and no time at all. Haven and Hearth opened on a Saturday in late April, which was the first genuinely warm Saturday of the year, the kind of day that comes at the end of a long winter and makes the city feel briefly like a different city, softer, more open, people on the sidewalks with their coats unzipped, looking up at the sky with the specific expression of people who had almost stopped believing in warmth. The space was small. She had found it through a commercial listing service, and the rent was low because of a history of water damage that had been fully remediated but still spooked potential tenants, which was their problem and her advantage. 3 months of renovation, done partly with contractors and partly with her own hands, and Darius's, who had shown up the second Saturday without being asked, and who came back every weekend after that, and did not discuss what had happened in December, and neither did she, not yet, but who was there, consistently, which was its own kind of language. Her father came to the soft opening. He sat in the window seat she'd put in along the east wall and drank coffee and ate a piece of the sourdough she'd been developing for 3 months, the recipe she'd started with at 17 and had been rebuilding from memory. And he looked at the space, at the warm wood and the good light and the small chalkboard menu and the 3 cafe tables and the counter with its display case of things she'd made that morning. And something in his face did the thing she'd seen once in a hallway at Han's clinic, that door opening. He said, "Your mother would have sat here all day." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry it took all that for you to get here." She said, "Me too." They drank their coffee. Outside, the first of the real customers were gathering at the door. She'd done a small social media push, enough to create a line without overcommitting, and the line was modest and real, and she felt it when she saw it. The specific physical feeling of something you built being used by people who don't owe you the using. She had been open for 4 hours when the bell above the door rang at 2 in the afternoon, and she looked up from behind the counter and Min Jae walked in. He was in a coat she hadn't seen before, lighter than the December coat, dark blue, appropriate for April. He looked well. The left side stiffness was gone. He looked like himself, which she had thought about during the intervening months more than she had told anyone, what it would be like to see him without crisis as the context. He looked at the space, at the counter, the display case, the chalkboard, at the customers eating at the 3 tables, at the window seat where her father had been. He'd gone an hour ago, promising to come back Thursday. His face did something that she recognized now, that single-degree warmth, but more of it, more than she'd seen before. He walked to the counter. "Black coffee," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You could have anything," she said. There's a cardamom roll that's quite good, I'm told. Black coffee, he said, and there was something in it that was not quite a smile but was adjacent. She made him the coffee. She put it in front of him, and he picked it up and drank it the way people drink things they have been waiting for. And she leaned on the counter across from him and looked at the line still coming through the door and the customers at the tables, and thought about all the mornings this space would accumulate. All the ordinary, specific mornings of a small neighborhood bakery where people came because the bread was real and the coffee was hot, and nobody asked questions they didn't want the answers to. The attorney, she said, the 17 families. 14 cases are in active process, he said. 3 settled already, debts voided, documentation destroyed. The connection between Park and Reeves is on record now. A pause. Park is managing a significant reduction in his operational capacity. He's not finished, but he's diminished. Reeves. Retired, Min-jae said. Voluntarily, given the circumstances. She thought about retired and decided she didn't need more detail. Cole. Working with the attorney as a witness. In exchange for the documentation Reeves held on him being sealed. He drank. He cooperated fully. Good, she said. She meant it simply and completely, the way she'd been trying to say things since December, without the qualifying layers, without the protective distance, just the thing itself. Your father, he said, better. He's in something, a support group, for gambling. He's gone 3 times. She paused. Darius is going with him, to the first session of each week. She straightened slightly. It's not fixed. I'm not going to tell you it's fixed, but it's moving. Moving is enough, Min-jae said. She looked at him. Are you going to come back here? He set down the coffee cup, considered her question with the full seriousness it deserved. If I'm welcome, he said. You're welcome, she said. No qualifying, no preface. He nodded. He reached into his coat and set money on the counter, and too much, as at the diner, the same gesture, and she picked it up and gave him back the difference, and he looked at the exact change in his hand with something that might have been amusement. The diner, he said. Felix is fine. He hired someone else, taller. She doesn't drop the coffee pot. She paused. I went back once to tell him. He gave me a container of soup and said not to be a stranger. She looked at the display case. I bring him bread sometimes. On Tuesdays. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment, in the afternoon light of haven and hearth, with the sound of conversation and the smell of bread and coffee and the particular warmth of a space that has been built by someone who knew exactly what they were building it for. Tuesdays, he said. Tuesdays, she said. He picked up his coffee. She watched him look at the room, not the room of a man assessing a space for threat or advantage, not the room of a man calculating exits, the room of a man who has spent a long time in places where warmth was functional and is encountering warmth that is simply itself. The bell above the door rang. More customers. She looked up, then back at him. I have to work, she said. I know, he said. Go ahead. She went around the counter to the floor, to the new people coming in, and she greeted them and showed them the chalkboard and described the cardamom roll in terms she'd been practicing since she made the first batch Thursday. And she was aware of him at the counter behind her, but she did not look back because looking back was no longer the reflex it had been. At some point, she glanced over and he was gone. She found the coffee cup on the counter, empty, rinsed. He had rinsed it, she noticed, which was either habit or consideration and was possibly both. And beside it was a folded piece of paper she hadn't seen him leave. She unfolded it. His handwriting was precise and angular. 4 words. Tuesday. I'll bring coffee. She stood at her counter in the bakery she had built from a memory and a decision and 3 months of work, in the warm April afternoon of a year that had started in a rainstorm and an industrial diner and a girl who had learned not to scream, and she folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. Outside, the city moved. The line had thinned to a manageable drift of people coming in and going out, carrying her bread back into their lives. And the afternoon light through the east window had shifted gold the way April light does when the sun starts its long descent. and Haven and Hearth smelled like everything she had always been trying to get back to. She went to work. She was still working when the light went. She was still there when the last customer left, and she locked the door and turned the sign and stood in her empty bakery in the quiet and looked at what she had made. In December, she had been a woman with $900 and a coffee pot she couldn't keep in her hands. She had been bruises on top of bruises and a family that had failed her and a life she was barely keeping level. She had been, by most measures, someone whose situation was stable in the specific way of something that has been low for so long that low has become the baseline. She was still that person. She was not under any illusion that December had remade her. She was the same woman, with the same history, the same damage in the same places, the same family with the same difficulty, the same city around her with the same teeth. But she was standing in a bakery she owned on a Saturday evening in April, and the last customer had left carrying a loaf of sourdough that she had made with her own hands from a recipe she had been holding in her memory for years, and a man who had rinsed his cup was going to come back on Tuesday, and her father was going to a support group, and 17 families had paperwork in the hands of someone who knew what to do with it. She untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter. She turned off the lights one by one, each one diminishing the space by a degree, until the only light left was what came through the window from the street, the amber of the city at evening, that particular light that makes everything look like it has always been there and always will be. She stood in it for a moment. Then she picked up her keys and went home. Of a lamppost with total absorption, the ordinary texture of things continuing. She found a cab 2 blocks east and got in and gave the address and watched the city go past the windows. And she thought about a bakery, not as a dream, but as a project, a thing with steps and timeline and work. And she thought about what the steps might be. And the thinking was good. It was the right kind of thinking, the kind that was pointed toward rather than away from. 6 months is a long time and no time at all. Haven and Hearth opened on a Saturday in late April, which was the first genuinely warm Saturday of the year, the kind of day that comes at the end of a long winter and makes the city feel briefly like a different city, softer, more open, people on the sidewalks with their coats unzipped, looking up at the sky with the specific expression of people who had almost stopped believing in warmth. The space was small. She had found it through a commercial listing service, and the rent was low because of a history of water damage that had been fully remediated but still spooked potential tenants, which was their problem and her advantage. 3 months of renovation, done partly with contractors and partly with her own hands, and Darius's, who had shown up the second Saturday without being asked, and who came back every weekend after that, and did not discuss what had happened in December, and neither did she, not yet, but who was there, consistently, which was its own kind of language. Her father came to the soft opening. He sat in the window seat she'd put in along the east wall and drank coffee and ate a piece of the sourdough she'd been developing for 3 months, the recipe she'd started with at 17 and had been rebuilding from memory. And he looked at the space, at the warm wood and the good light and the small chalkboard menu and the 3 cafe tables and the counter with its display case of things she'd made that morning, and something in his face did the thing she'd seen once in a hallway at Han's clinic, that door opening. He said, "Your mother would have sat here all day." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry it took all that for you to get here." She said, "Me too." They drank their coffee. Outside, the first of the real customers were gathering at the door. She'd done a small social media push, enough to create a line without overcommitting, and the line was modest and real, and she felt it when she saw it. The specific physical feeling of something you built being used by people who don't owe you the using. She had been open for 4 hours when the bell above the door rang at 2 in the afternoon, and she looked up from behind the counter and Min Jae walked in. He was in a coat she hadn't seen before, lighter than the December coat, dark blue, appropriate for April. He looked well. The left side stiffness was gone. He looked like himself, which she had thought about during the intervening months more than she had told anyone, what it would be like to see him without crisis as the context. He looked at the space, at the counter, the display case, the chalkboard, at the customers eating at the 3 tables, at the window seat where her father had been. He'd gone an hour ago, promising to come back Thursday. His face did something that she recognized now. That single-degree warmth, but more of it, more than she'd seen before. He walked to the counter. "Black coffee," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "You could have anything," she said. "There's a cardamom roll that's quite good, I'm told." "Black coffee," he said, and there was something in it that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent. She made him the coffee. She put it in front of him, and he picked it up and drank it the way people drink things they have been waiting for. And she leaned on the counter across from him and looked at the line still coming through the door and the customers at the tables, and thought about all the mornings this space would accumulate. All the ordinary, specific mornings of a small neighborhood bakery where people came because the bread was real and the coffee was hot, and nobody asked questions they didn't want the answers to. "The attorney," she said. "The 17 families. 14 cases are in active process," he said. 3 settled already, debts voided, documentation destroyed. The connection between Park and Reeves is on record now." A pause. "Park is managing a significant reduction in his operational capacity. He's not finished, but he's diminished." "Reeves." "Retired," Min-jae said. "Voluntarily, given the circumstances." She thought about retired and decided she didn't need more detail. "Cole. Working with the attorney as a witness. In exchange for the documentation Reeves held on him being sealed." He drank. "He cooperated fully." "Good," she said. She meant it simply and completely, the way she'd been trying to say things since December, without the qualifying layers, without the protective distance, just the thing itself. "Your father," he said, "better. He's in something, a support group, for gambling. He's gone 3 times. She paused. "Darius is going with him, to the first session of each week." She straightened slightly. "It's not fixed. I'm not going to tell you it's fixed, but it's moving." "Moving is enough," Min-jae said. She looked at him. "Are you going to come back here?" He set down the coffee cup, considered her question with the full seriousness it deserved. "If I'm welcome," he said. "You're welcome," she said. No qualifying, no preface. He nodded. He reached into his coat and set money on the counter, and too much, as at the diner, the same gesture, and she picked it up and gave him back the difference, and he looked at the exact change in his hand with something that might have been amusement. "The diner," he said. "Felix is fine. He hired someone else, taller. She doesn't drop the coffee pot." She paused. "I went back once to tell him. He gave me a container of soup and said not to be a stranger." She looked at the display case. "I bring him bread sometimes. On Tuesdays." Min-jae looked at her for a long moment, in the afternoon light of haven and hearth, with the sound of conversation and the smell of bread and coffee and the particular warmth of a space that has been built by someone who knew exactly what they were building it for. "Tuesdays," he said. "Tuesdays," she said. He picked up his coffee. She watched him look at the room, not the room of a man assessing a space for threat or advantage, not the room of a man calculating exits, the room of a man who has spent a long time in places where warmth was functional and is encountering warmth that is simply itself. The bell above the door rang. More customers. She looked up, then back at him. "I have to work," she said. "I know," he said. "Go ahead." She went around the counter to the floor, to the new people coming in, and she greeted them and showed them the chalkboard and described the cardamom roll in terms she'd been practicing since she made the first batch Thursday. And she was aware of him at the counter behind her, but she did not look back because looking back was no longer the reflex it had been. At some point she glanced over and he was gone. She found the coffee cup on the counter, empty, rinsed. He had rinsed it, she noticed, which was either habit or consideration and was possibly both. And beside it was a folded piece of paper she hadn't seen him leave. She unfolded it. His handwriting was precise and angular. 4 words. "Tuesday. I'll bring coffee." She stood at her counter in the bakery she had built from a memory and a decision and 3 months of work, in the warm April afternoon of a year that had started in a rainstorm and an industrial diner and a girl who had learned not to scream, and she folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. Outside, The city moved. The line had thinned to a manageable drift of people coming in and going out, carrying her bread back into their lives. And the afternoon light through the east window had shifted gold the way April light does when the sun starts its long descent. And haven and hearth smelled like everything she had always been trying to get back to. She went to work. She was still working when the light went. She was still there when the last customer left, and she locked the door and turned the sign and stood in her empty bakery in the quiet and looked at what she had made. In December, she had been a woman with $900 and a coffee pot she couldn't keep in her hands. She had been bruises on top of bruises and a family that had failed her and a life she was barely keeping level. She had been, by most measures, someone whose situation was stable in the specific way of something that has been low for so long that low has become the baseline. She was still that person. She was not under any illusion that December had remade her. She was the same woman, with the same history, the same damage in the same places, the same family with the same difficulty, the same city around her with the same teeth. But she was standing in a bakery she owned on a Saturday evening in April, and the last customer had left carrying a loaf of sourdough that she had made with her own hands from a recipe she had been holding in her memory for years, and a man who had rinsed his cup was going to come back on Tuesday, and her father was going to a support group, and 17 families had paperwork in the hands of someone who knew what to do with it. She untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter. She turned off the lights one by one, each one diminishing the space by a degree, until the only light left was what came through the window from the street. The amber of the city at evening, that particular light that makes everything look like it has always been there and always will be. She stood in it for a moment. Then she picked up her keys and went home.